The wind in the New Mexico territory was a restless thing. It owned the land. It blew south from the Llano Estacado, the high flat plains that the Spanish had called staked, a sea of grass so wide it swallowed the sky. The wind carried red grit. That grit worked its way into a man's food, his water, and his soul. It tasted of iron and an emptiness so vast it felt like the beginning of the world. This was the 1880s, pushing hard toward the 1890s. The land itself felt like it was holding its breath, waiting. Far to the east, a new sound was growing. The railroad. It was not a whistle yet, not out here. It was a low vibration you felt in the soles of your boots, a hum in the bones of the earth. It was a promise of steel and schedules, of noise and compressed time. It was a sound that set Kohana's teeth on edge. He lived where that sound died. His cabin was not built on the land so much as into it. He had found a crease in the earth, a shallow canyon wall sheltered by a stand of cottonwoods trees. The trees were a miracle, their leaves a trembling green in a world baked red and brown. They drank from a spring that bubbled cool water from the rock. Kohana was a man of perhaps 30 winters. He had seen enough of the world to want no more of it. He had been a scout for the United States Army. He had worn their blue coat, a heavy, scratching wool that felt like a betrayal against his skin. Because of that coat, he was trusted by no one. The white officers who paid for his eyes, for his ability to read a broken branch or a disturbed pebble, looked at him as if he were a clean rifle that might miss fire. They spoke their orders slowly, as if he were a child. And the people, his own Numunu, the Comanche, saw the brass buttons and turned their faces away. The war had taken his world, and the peace that followed had taken his place in it. So he had made a new place. He lived on rabbit and deer. He tended a small patch of corn and beans by the spring. His hands in the dark, cool earth. He spoke to his horse, a gray Mustang that watched him with an unsettling intelligence. He sought only one thing: silence. He did not want quiet, which was just the absence of sound. He wanted silence, which was the absence of man. He wanted a life unwound from the clockwork of other men. He wanted a long, slow atonement for the noise of the war, for the commands he had obeyed and the things he had been forced to see. He sat on a stool with 3 legs, the pine worn smooth by his own weight. He was mending a trap line, his fingers working the rawhide with practiced economy. Beside him, on the rough-hewn table, lay a piece of chipped gray flint. It was shaped like a teardrop, its edges lethally sharp. It could skin a rabbit or shave a man's face. It was his mother's. She had pressed it into his hand the day the soldiers came to the reservation, the day they had come for the scouts. "Be the stone," she had told him, her voice low, not for secrecy, but for weight. "Not the thunder. The thunder makes noise but passes. The stone endures. Keep your silence in the storm." The memory was not a comfort. It was a blade. It came with the smell of gun oil and the sour, acidic sweat of nervous men. It came with the cold, steel-gray eyes of the captain who had used his sight but hated his blood. He had led them. He had found the camps. He had done his job. And the silence he kept then was a different kind. A silence of shame. He closed his fist, his knuckles white. The cabin was his fortress against that memory. Here, silence was clean. It was pure. It was his. Miles away, a different kind of misery was moving west. Evelyn Hart felt the stagecoach slam into a dry wash. The jolt threw her hard against the leather brace, knocking the breath from her lungs. She was a woman of maybe 23, or perhaps 24 years. She was not made for this country. Her dark wool dress, practical for a Philadelphia autumn, was a dusty furnace in the New Mexico heat. The grit coated her eyelashes, making her blink. It settled in the fine lines of her mouth, a constant, dry taste of defeat. She had been a teacher. She had believed in chalkboards, in the clean, sharp smell of new paper, in the power of a well-reasoned sentence. She had believed in order. She had plans to bring education to the frontier, to open a school for the children of settlers and anyone else who wished to learn. But plans were a luxury. Family debt, a sudden, invisible catastrophe of failed investments and broken promises back east, had shattered her world. Her father's name was ruined. Her modest inheritance, the money that was to fund her school, was gone. She had packed her valise, abandoned her classroom, and bought a one-way ticket west. She was searching for her brother, Matthew. He was all the family she had left. He was her last hope. She kept one hand tight on her valise, as if it were a lifeline. She would not let it rest on the floor. Inside, wrapped in a linen cloth, was her McGuffey's fourth eclectic reader. It was a heavy, moral book. It was filled with lessons on virtue, thrift, and proper industry. It was her armor. It was her unwavering belief that order and learning could, and must, tame any wilderness. Beside the book, much thinner and creased from 100 readings, was Matthew's last letter. His handwriting was hopeful, full of talk of opportunity in a new town, a town called Esperanza. The letter was 3 months old. It was the only map she had. Esperanza, the Spanish word for hope. As the town finally came into view, a handful of buildings thrown down in the dirt. The name felt like a cruel joke. It was a wound on the skin of the prairie. The wind howled down the single wide street, rattling the false front of a building painted with the words, Red Calf Saloon. Kohana knew the town. He avoided it. He went only when he must, perhaps 4 times a year, when his salt ran low or he needed more cartridges. He would trade his cured pelts and walk out again before the sun set. He never went near the Red Calf Saloon. That was a place for desperate men, for noise, for the kind of trouble that always ended with broken glass and blood on the floorboards. The law in Esperanza was a mixture of things. There was federal law from the distant fort, town law from a sheriff who seemed more interested in his pocket watch than justice, and the older, deeper laws of the tribes. It was a place where conflicts festered. Kohana did his business, what little he had, at Widow Malone's general store. The building was solid, made of sod and thick timber, not like the flimsy fronts of the saloon. Widow Malone saw everything. She was a woman hardened by the land, her face a map of losses. But her eyes were sharp. Her store was the heart of the town. It was where news arrived, where rumors were born, and where quiet warnings were given. It was at the widow's store that Kohana had first heard the whispers about Felix Pike. It was there he learned about Pike's traveling theater. Just last week, Kohana had seen the wagons himself. He had been tracking a mountain lion near the new railhead when he saw them. They were painted a vulgar red and gold, colors that bled into the landscape. Felix Pike and Company. The sign on the largest wagon proclaimed, a modern theatrical in vaudeville. He had watched from a high ridge, his body as still as the rock around him. He saw no actors practicing their lines. He saw no musicians tuning their instruments. He saw only hard men with pistols on their hips, their faces flat and watchful. He saw shadows moving behind the canvas flaps of the wagons. The shadows were small. They moved with a frightened quickness. Then he had heard it, faint on the wind, the sound of a heavy padlock clicking shut. The whispers at Widow Malone's store filled in the rest. Pike's theater followed the railroad crews, a shadow that fed on the lonely, angry men building the line. He supplied his show with girls from back east, like the ones in the advertisements, who thought they were answering positions for nannying or sewing. Girls taken from farms, girls who simply vanished. The town sheriff, a man with a heavy gold watch chain and a soft belly, always looked the other way. The railroad brought money, and Felix Pike paid in cash. The stagecoach carrying Evelyn Hart rattled down the main track. It passed the faint, unmarked trail that led to Kohana's hidden spring. He heard it, the rumble of the heavy wheels, the crack of the driver's whip, the protest of the axles. It was a violation of the quiet. He set his flint knife down on the table. Another noise, another piece of the outside world pressing in. demanding to be noticed. Evelyn did not see the hidden trail. She saw only the false fronts of Esperanza growing larger through the dust. She was a woman who had spent her life protecting herself, keeping her own counsel. She had learned to avoid the casual touch of strangers, to build a wall of propriety around herself in a world that was not safe for a woman alone. Her body was her own, a fortress she guarded fiercely. Kohana was a man who had chosen isolation. He had sworn off the touch of any human hand, seeing it only as a precursor to betrayal or violence. His body was his own, a tool for survival, not for connection. The coach groaned to a stop in front of the Wells Fargo office. The door swung open, releasing a cloud of stale air and dust. Evelyn Hart gathered her skirts, her hand gripping the handle of her valise. Inside, her fingers brushed the hard cover of the McGuffey reader. Kohana stood up from his stool. He picked up the gray flint knife, the stone cool and familiar in his palm. She stepped down onto the dusty street of Esperanza, her gaze searching the hostile faces for any sign of her brother. He stepped out of his cabin into the sunlight, his gaze sweeping the high ridge, searching for any sign of the mountain lion. The wind howled between them, a high, lonely sound. It was ignorant of them both, but the storm was gathering. It was ready to throw these two souls, both masters of their own silence, directly into its heart. Evelyn Hart stepped onto the main street of Esperanza, and the wind tried to push her back. It was not a breeze. It was a physical force, solid and smelling of alkali dust. It whipped her skirts against her legs and stole the bonnet from her head, sending it tumbling down the street like a dead prairie bird. She let it go. Her focus was on a small, sun-warped sign hanging by one hinge. J. P. Finley, attorney at law. She pushed the door open. The room inside was suffocatingly hot and smelled of stale tobacco and paper mold. A man who was mostly waistcoat and watch chain looked up from a desk piled high with ledgers. He was not J. P. Finley. "Mr. Finley is gone," the man said, not unkindly, just stating a fact of the landscape, like a dry well. "Left 2 months ago, said the law here was written in dust." Evelyn's stomach tightened. "I am looking for my brother, Matthew Hart. He wrote that he was working with Mr. Finley." The man sighed, pushing his spectacles up his nose. "Ah, young Matthew. Idealistic. He was typing up some documents for Finley. Started asking questions, the wrong questions, about Felix Pike." Evelyn gripped the handle of her valise. "Where is he, my brother?" "That is the thing, ma'am," the man said, finally showing a flicker of pity. "He is not here. He is not anywhere. He went missing. Over 6 weeks ago. Went to the sheriff. He did, with a stack of papers. The sheriff told him to mind his own business. 2 days later, Matthew was gone." The air left Evelyn's lungs. Gone. The word was a void. She backed out of the office, her hand to her mouth, and found herself on the wooden boardwalk again. The wind hit her, and the town, which had looked grim, now looked like a trap. She needed information. She needed food. She had not eaten since that morning. She saw the Red Calf Saloon across the street, its doors swinging, releasing a blast of piano music and coarse laughter. She knew it was no place for her, but it was the only place that looked alive. She straightened her spine, a teacher preparing to face an unruly class, and walked across the street. The moment she pushed open the bat-wing doors, the noise stopped. The piano player's hands froze, every eye, hard and assessing, turned to her. The air was thick with smoke, the smell of spilled whiskey, and unwashed men. A large man with a stained beard and a pistol belted over his gut slid off his stool. "Well, look what the wind blew in. You lost, little lady. Or you're looking for a new line of work." His companions laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. Evelyn ignored him, her gaze fixed on the bartender. "Sir, I am looking for a room, and some information." "We sell whiskey, not information," the bartender said, wiping a glass. "She looks like she could use a drink," the bearded man said. He stepped closer, close enough for her to smell the rot on his breath. Maybe she is one of Pike's new girls. Got here early for the show. I am not, Evelyn said, her voice shaking only slightly. I am a teacher. I am looking for my brother, Matthew Hart. The name dropped into the silence like a stone. The bearded man's eyes narrowed. Never heard of him, but if you are a teacher, he said, reaching out to touch a lock of her hair. Maybe you can teach me a lesson. In the far back corner of the saloon, sitting in a shadow so deep he seemed part of it, Kohana watched. He had come to town for salt and seen the new wagons, the red and gold paint of Felix Pike's company. He had come into the Red Calf to listen. He learned more in 5 minutes of silence here than in a full day at the general store. He saw the woman. He saw her fear. And he saw the iron rod of pride that kept her from running. He recognized the man harassing her. Bowie Sam, Pike's dog. Kohana did not move. He did not reach for his knife. His mother's voice was in his ear. Be the stone. He just watched. He catalogued the faces. Bowie Sam. The 2 younger men with him, both carrying new pistols. The bartender, who quickly looked away. He filed the information. He saw the woman flinch but stand her ground. He saw Bowie Sam's hand. He saw the sheriff enter the saloon, tap his watch, and share a quiet laugh with the bartender. Kohana had what he needed. I am telling you to leave me alone, Evelyn said, her voice rising. Or what, teacher? Bowie Sam sneered. Or you will answer to the sheriff, she bluffed, her heart hammering. The men roared with laughter. The sheriff, Bowie Sam chuckled. That is rich. The sheriff knows better than to bother Mr. Pike's business. Your brother probably found that out. Maybe he is part of the show now, shoveling coal for the train. The implication was horrifying, that Matthew was not just missing, but captured, forced into service on the very railroad show he was trying to expose. Evelyn turned to flee. As she pushed through the doors, Bowie Sam slapped her hard on the backside. The saloon erupted. Humiliation burned her face hotter than the sun. She ran, stumbling off the boardwalk, her valise banging against her knees. She ran without looking, ducking into the first alley she saw, a narrow gap between the saloon and the next building. She was breathing in ragged gasps, leaning against a rough plank wall. A figure stepped out of the alley shadows. It was not Bowie Sam. It was one of the younger men from the saloon. Mr. Pike does not like people asking about his business, the man whispered. He grabbed her wrist, his fingers digging into the bone. You should get back on that stagecoach and go home. He shoved her. Evelyn fell, her hands scraping against the hard-packed dirt. She scrambled up, her valise still in her grip, and ran deeper into the alley. It opened onto a yard full of metal and smoke. The sound of a hammer on an anvil rang out. She pounded on the wide door of the smithy. The hammering stopped. The door scraped open, revealing a massive man with a soot-stained face and gentle eyes. He was Gus Ortega, the blacksmith. He saw her torn dress, the terror in her face. Señorita, he said, his voice a low rumble. You are not safe. Go to the Widow Malone, her store, at the end of the street. She will help you. He pointed with his hammer. Go now. Do not stop. Evelyn nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She ran back to the street, her eyes darting. The man who had grabbed her was gone. She hurried to the sod building, the sign for Malone's general store, a beacon. Inside, the store was cool and orderly. It smelled of coffee beans, new denim, and dried herbs. A woman with hair the color of iron and a face that had seen too much stood behind the counter. Gus Ortega sent me, Evelyn said, breathless. I see that, the widow said. Her voice was dry as dust. You went to the Red Calf. It was not a question. You are looking for someone. My brother, Matthew Hart. The Widow Malone's face closed. Trust no one here, girl. Not the sheriff, not the railroad men. This town is owned by Felix Pike. They said They said Matthew might be on the train. It is possible, the widow said, her eyes flat. Pike takes who he wants. Boys for labor, girls for... She stopped, her gaze falling to the valise in Evelyn's hand. What is in the bag? My things, a book. Evelyn did not know why she said it. Show me. Evelyn unclasped the valise and pulled out the McGuffey's reader. The widow's hand flew to her mouth. A small, strangled sound escaped her. She reached under the counter and brought up a framed daguerreotype. It was a young girl, perhaps 16, with hopeful eyes, holding the exact same book. My Sarah, the widow whispered. She was going to be a teacher, too. She loved that book. Pike's men took her 3 months ago, the same week your brother vanished. The room tilted. Evelyn leaned against the counter. The hope that had carried her 1,000 miles dissolved, leaving only a cold, hard dread. At that same moment, Kohana was walking his Mustang out of the town's livery. He had his salt. He had his information. He had heard the men in the red calf talking. Bowie Sam was moving the new goods on the Friday train. That was 2 days from now. Kohana wanted to be miles away before then. He wanted to be back in his silent canyon, where the world of men and their cruelties could not reach him. He swung into the saddle, his movements fluid and economical. He turned the horse not toward the main road, but toward the open prairie, a shortcut only he knew. The sky, which had been a clear, punishing blue all day, was changing. To the west, a wall of yellow was building. It was not cloud, it was dust. Kohana had seen this before. It was a norther, a sudden violent storm that could strip paint from a wagon and choke a man where he stood. He urged his horse into a lope. Evelyn left the widow's store in a daze. She had no plan. Matthew was gone. The law was corrupt. She was alone. She started walking, back toward the stagecoach office, though she had no money for a return ticket. Then the world ended. The wind hit. It was not a gust, but a solid wall of grit that struck her with the force of a locomotive. The sky went from blue to a sickening, churning yellow-black in seconds. She could not see. She could not breathe. The air was full of sand so thick it felt like she was drowning in earth. She stumbled, falling to her knees. Panic, pure and primal, seized her. She was going to die here, suffocating in the dirt of a town called Hope. She screamed, but the wind tore the sound from her mouth. Through the roaring chaos, a shape emerged. A horse, moving ghost-like through the maelstrom. A rider, broad-shouldered and wrapped in a dark poncho. The figure did not slow, but bent from the saddle. A powerful arm encircled her waist, lifting her from the ground as if she weighed nothing. She was pulled up, seated in front of the rider, her face pressed hard against a chest that felt as solid as oak. The horse spun and plunged back into the storm. Evelyn clung to the poncho, her eyes squeezed shut. She could feel the man's body heat through his clothes, smell the clean scent of wood smoke and juniper that clung to him. They rode for what felt like an eternity, the world reduced to the howl of the wind and the steady, powerful rhythm of the horse beneath them. Then, as suddenly as it began, the noise lessened. The wind was still shrieking, but it was muffled, as if from a distance. The horse stopped. She was lowered to the ground, her legs weak. She opened her eyes. They were in a small, sheltered canyon. A cabin made of dark wood was built into the rock wall, a curl of smoke rising from its chimney. A spring bubbled nearby, surrounded by cottonwoods, their leaves shaking violently. The man dismounted. He pulled the poncho's hood back. It was the Indian, the man from the shadow in the saloon. His face was stark, carved from the same rock as the canyon. His black hair was long, tied back with a leather strip. His eyes were dark and unreadable. He motioned her inside. The cabin was one room, clean and sparse. A fire burned low in the hearth. A bedroll was in one corner, a simple table in another. He spoke, and his voice was like his surroundings, low and rough, like stones rubbing together. "You will be safe here," Until the storm passes, the condition is silence. Evelyn just nodded, her throat raw from the dust. She sank onto a small, three-legged stool, her entire body shaking. He handed her a dipper of water from a wooden bucket. It was the sweetest, coldest water she had ever tasted. He moved to the other side of the cabin, turning his back to her, and began checking the leather straps of his saddle. He offered her privacy, but the tension was thick. She watched him. She saw the coiled strength in his shoulders. She remembered his stillness in the saloon. He had watched. He had listened. "You know who they are," she said, her voice a croak. "The men in the saloon. The ones who mentioned Felix Pike." He did not turn. "I know them." "They took my brother," she said, the words spilling out. "They took him, and they took a girl named Sarah Malone. They are putting them on a train. On Friday. You heard them, did not you?" He slowly turned to face her. His expression was flat. "I heard." "You have to help me," she pleaded, standing up. "You know this land. You know where they are. Please, I will pay you. I do not have much, but I can." "No," he said. The word was final. It was not angry. It was absolute. "I do not get involved in the lives of others anymore. The storm will pass by morning. Then you will leave." "You do not understand," she cried, desperation making her bold. She stepped toward him, grabbing his arm. "He is my brother. It is my fault. I should have come sooner." He stiffened at her touch, his entire body going rigid. He did not pull away, but the rejection was a violence in itself. He looked down at her hand on his arm. Evelyn, ashamed, pulled her hand back. As she did, her sleeve rode up. On the pale skin of her wrist, 4 dark bruises were already forming. The perfect, distinct imprint of a man's fingers. The mark from the man in the alley. Kohana's gaze locked onto the bruise. His face did not change. No flicker of pity, no anger, but his eyes, which had been distant and cold, suddenly focused on her. He saw the mark. He saw the terror behind her eyes, the same terror he had seen in the saloon, but now it was branded onto her skin. He looked at the handprint. Then he looked back at her face. He said nothing. He turned back to his saddle, but his movements were no longer calm. The silence in the cabin was no longer peaceful. It was stretched tight, like a trap line waiting to spring. The marks on her wrist were stark in the cabin's low light. He saw 4 fingers and a thumb, a map of another man's violence, printed on her skin. It was the same violence he had watched begin in the saloon. He had been the stone. He had kept his silence, and the storm, in its howling, impersonal fury, had thrown the consequence of that silence right into his home. The bruise was loud. It shamed his quiet. He turned away from her, his back a rigid wall. "The storm will pass," he said, his voice flat. "You will leave." "I cannot leave," she insisted. Her voice was not pleading now. It was as hard as the packed dirt floor. She would not be dismissed. "They have him. I know you do not want money. I have none left, but I have a skill, a trade." He grunted, his hands finding work, checking the lacing on a rawhide legging. "I have no need of Eastern skills." "You do not," she agreed. She stepped forward, but stopped, honoring the invisible line he had drawn between them. "But there are others. I saw children in the arroyo. Miles back, children of the people. They had no school. They had no books." He stopped his work. He slowly turned. The offer was an insult. He had built this life to escape the very world she represented. She offered him the noise of a schoolhouse, the chatter of children, the sharp, foreign smell of chalk and paper. He wanted less of her world, and she offered to plant its roots at his spring. "You would trade your life's work," he said, "to find your brother." "My life's work," she said, her voice dropping, "is to bring order and sense to the world. There is no sense in this. There is no order in him." She gestured toward the door, toward the town, toward Felix Pike. I must do this. I will stay. I will teach anyone who wishes to learn. In exchange, just guide me. Take me to where his show camps." "And when you find this show," he said, "what then? You are one woman. They are an army of hard men." "My brother," she said, her hands moving to her valise. She pulled out the creased letter. She also pulled out a small, cheap journal, its cover damp from the storm. He was smart. He knew he was in danger. He sent this to the lawyer, the man in the office, the one who took Mr. Finley's desk. He gave it to me. She opened it. The pages were filled with Matthew's neat, economical script, observations, times, dates, wagon numbers. "He wrote about a special car," she said, her finger tracing a line. "He called it the circus car, but he said it was not for animals. It was for people. He followed them, trying to find where they kept the key. His last entry, 'The ink stops here.'" She held the book out. "He was at a place called Mustang Narrows." Kohana's head lifted. Mustang Narrows. He knew it. It was 2 days' ride to the north. It was a bottleneck in the high plains, a place where old game trails crossed the new railroad survey line. A perfect place to hide a wagon train. He looked from the journal to the bruise on her wrist. He looked at her eyes. They were not asking for rescue. They were asking for a map. "I will take you to Mustang Narrows," he said. The words tasted like dry alkali in his mouth. "I will show you the way. When we get there, my part is done. I return to my home. You go on alone." Relief washed over her face, so potent she nearly sagged. "Yes, that is all I ask. Thank you." "There are rules," he cut in, his voice sharp, reclaiming his space, his silence. "My rules." She nodded, pulling her dignity back around her shoulders like a cloak. "Yes, we do not touch." He stated it not as a request, but as a law of nature, like gravity. "You will not touch me." He paused, the memory of her hand on his arm still prickling his skin. "I will not touch you." Evelyn flushed, remembering, understood. "You sleep there." He pointed to the corner by the cold hearth. "I sleep by the door. You do not cross the center beam of the floor after dark." "Agreed." "If you must enter this cabin," he said, "you will knock 3 times, like this." He rapped his knuckles on the table. "Thump, thump, thump. You will wait until I answer." "Yes." If anything must change." He struggled with the words, the concept foreign to his chosen life. "It will be spoken. It will be agreed. There are no assumptions in this house." "Spoken and agreed," she repeated. The words sounded like a vow. She finally understood. He was not just protecting himself from her. He was offering her the very thing Pike and his men had tried to steal, a space where her boundaries were absolute. The storm howled outside, a high, thin scream that made the small cabin feel like the only solid place on earth. They were locked in by the wind. They did not speak. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was shared. Kohana sat on his 3-legged stool. He took the gray flint knife from the table. Using a piece of antler, he began to work the edge, chipping away microscopic flakes. The tink, tink, tink of the antler on the stone was the only sound in the cabin. It was a sound of preparation, of focus. Evelyn watched him. He was not a savage, despite what the men in the saloon would call him. He was a craftsman. He was a man of principles, even if they were principles she did not yet understand. He finished the knife, testing the razor edge against the calloused skin of his thumb. Satisfied, he slid it back into its sheath. He checked his saddle leathers, his rifle, the water skin. The wind died down for a moment. In the sudden, shocking quiet, they both heard it. Splash. It was not the sound of the spring. It was the sound of a boot slipping on a wet rock, down by the cottonwoods. Kohana was on his feet before the sound finished. His hand did not go to his rifle. He moved to the door, silent as a shadow. He put his eye to a small crack in the wood. Outside, in the churning, dusty moonlight, a man was moving. He was hunched against the wind, setting something by the water. A wire, a trap. Evelyn saw Kohana's body change. The coiled stillness she had seen in the saloon was gone. This was a different stillness. This was the stillness of a panther gathering itself to spring. It was Bowie Sam. He must have followed the tracks from town before the storm hit full force. Or perhaps, Kohana realized, he had been tracking him for days. Kohana slid his flint knife into the sheath on his belt. He did not take his rifle. He bent and picked up a heavy, smooth river stone from his hearth, its weight fitting perfectly in his palm. He looked at Evelyn. He put one finger to his lips. Silence. He slipped out the door. Evelyn rushed to the crack in the wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. She saw him. He did not walk. He flowed over the ground, using the noise of the wind to cover his movement. Bowie Sam was on his knees by the spring, cursing as he fumbled with the chain of a heavy bear trap. He was between Kohana and the horses. Kohana did not attack from behind. He stepped out from the shadow of a cottonwood, directly in Sam's path. Sam looked up, his eyes wide with shock. He dropped the trap, and his hand went to the massive knife on his hip. He was not fast enough. Kohana moved. He did not use the flint knife. He used the river stone. He struck Sam once, a short, brutal arc, hitting the wrist that was drawing the blade. Evelyn heard the sharp, wet sound of the bone snapping. Sam howled, a sound that was half pain and half rage. He clutched his broken hand to his chest. Kohana did not hit him again. He simply stood there, the stone in his hand, a silent promise of more. "You!" Sam spat, cradling his ruined hand. "You broke it! I will kill you, you heathen!" Kohana said nothing. He just watched him, his body poised. Bowie Sam looked at the silent Comanche. He looked at the cabin. He saw the light inside, saw Evelyn's silhouette. He understood. He backed away, his good hand raised. "This ain't your fight, Scout. This is Pike's business. He will hear about this. He will gut you for this." Kohana let him go. He watched as Sam stumbled into the darkness, one-armed, his trap left sprung and useless by the spring. Kohana returned to the cabin. He bolted the heavy wooden bar across the door. Evelyn was backed against the far wall, her hands over her mouth. He had a knife," she whispered, her whole body shaking. "Yes," Kohana said. He went to the fire and added a piece of wood. "You let him go. A message is better than a body," Kohana said, his voice flat. "A body brings the sheriff. Who is Pike's man? A message brings Pike, who now knows I am helping you. The fight has started." The wind gusted, rattling the door. From the darkness, Kohana's horse, tethered in the sheltered lee of the canyon, let out a high, nervous whinny. The sound broke her. Evelyn slid down the wall, her hands flying to her ears. No, please." She was breathing in short, terrible gasps. The whinny, the trap, the man in the dark. It was the train station, all over again. The smell of steam and coal. A man's hand grabbing her arm, trying to pull her into an alley. "Please, no!" She was panicking. Kohana saw it. This was not a plea for help. This was a mind-breaking. He crossed the room in 2 strides. He stopped, 1 foot from her, his hands held up, palms out. "Do not touch," he said, his voice firm, reminding himself as much as her. "I will not touch you. You are safe here." She gasped, trying to nod, her eyes wide with terror. "Breathe," he commanded. "You are breathing wrong. You are tasting the panic. Breathe with the wind. Listen." He held up his hand. "Listen to the wind. It is steady. It does not stop. In, out." He breathed, a deep, slow rhythm. "Breathe with me. 4 counts in, 4 counts out." He counted, his voice a low monotone, the only steady thing in the room. "In, 2, 3, 4. Hold. Out. 2, 3, 4. She tried. Her first breath was a ragged sob. Again, he said. Match the wind. In, 2, 3, 4. It is your air. Own it. Out. 2, 3, 4. She did it, and again, and again. The 4-4 rhythm became an anchor. The panic did not vanish, but it receded. It became a thing she could see, instead of a thing she was drowning in. She finally lowered her hands, her breathing still shuddering. But hers. How did you know to do that? Kohana did not answer immediately. He returned to his side of the room. He looked into the fire. Panic is a bad death, he said, his back to her. I have seen it. He thought of the railroad, the iron snake. He had been a boy, not much older than 10. When he saw it, a group of Comanche children had crept close to the tracks, daring each other. They had never seen such a thing. A child, a young girl, his cousin, had tripped. She had frozen, just as Evelyn had frozen. The train. The whistle was so loud, it seemed to shake the sky. The noise had paralyzed her. She had been hit. He hated that whistle. He hated the compressed, violent noise of the white man's world. It was a noise that stole the breath. He turned, the memory hardening his face. He reached for a small, woven object hanging from a roof beam. It was a small web of sinew in a willow hoop, adorned with a single, perfect hawk feather. He crossed the room and held it out to her. She looked at it, confused. For the sleep, he said. It will catch the bad memories. Let the good ones pass through. She hesitated, her hand trembling. I cannot. It is yours. It was my niece's, he said, his voice softening for the first time. She has no need of it anymore. You do. Take it. Evelyn slowly reached out. Her fingers brushed his. It was the first touch, accidental, quick as a spark. Both of them pulled back, as if burned. She closed her hand around the small hoop. Thank you. They slept, as they had agreed, in their separate corners. Kohana woke before the first light. The storm had passed. The air was washed clean, cold and sharp. The world was utterly silent. He moved to the door. It is time. Evelyn was already awake. She had not slept. She had sat, holding the dream catcher. She stood, her body stiff and sore. He handed her a piece of dried jerky and a water skin. He had his Mustang and a sturdy pack mule. He had no side saddle. You will ride the mule, he said. He is slow, but he does not fall. She nodded, putting her valise, with the reader and the journal, into a saddlebag. They moved out of the canyon. The sun was just a rumor of red light in the east. The ground was damp. The dust settled. The road was a long, salty track of red dirt. Evelyn pulled her thin cloak tighter. She looked back at the cabin. A small, safe place built into the rock. It was the first safe place she had known since leaving home. Kohana did not look back. He looked at the sky. High above them, a single red-tailed hawk was circling. It caught the new light. Its wings spread wide. It followed them as they moved. A silent, watchful eye. Heading north toward Mustang Narrows. The ride north was 2 days of silence and dust. The hawk that had followed them from the canyon was a persistent speck in the vast, empty blue. It circled, always circling, as if it were tethered to them by an invisible string. Kohana rode his Mustang, a gray ghost against the red earth. Evelyn rode the pack mule, her body a single, dull ache. She had not been raised for this. Her hands were raw from the mule's rough rope, and her legs and back screamed from the unfamiliar rhythm. But she did not complain. She watched the man in front of her. He never looked back, but she knew, with a certainty that chilled her, that he was aware of her every move. He was aware of the hawk, of the wind, of the way the lizard skittered over the rocks 100 yards away. He was a part of the land, and she was a trespasser. They reached Mustang Narrows late on the second day. It was not a canyon, but a deep, narrow split in the high plateau, a rocky channel that funneled the wind. Kohana dismounted and walked, his horse following. Evelyn slid stiffly from the mule's back, her legs buckling. The ground was churned. It was not the clean, rain-washed dirt of the prairie. This was the mark of many men, many animals, and heavy wagons. "They were here," she said, her voice dry. Kohana walked to the center of the clearing. He knelt by a ring of blackened stones. He touched the ash. He sifted it through his fingers. "Cold," he said. He pointed to the deep ruts in the ground. The mud was hard, cracked at the edges. "They left 2 days ago." 2 days. The words hit her like a physical blow. The hope that had carried her through the agonizing ride began to crumble. "We are too late." "Maybe not," Kohana said. He was not looking at the campfire. He was looking at the stakes, the short, thick posts driven into the ground where the horses had been tethered. He walked slowly, his eyes scanning the ground. Then he stopped. He pointed. "Look!" Evelyn hurried over, her skirts catching on the scrub brush. Tied to the base of one stake, half hidden in the dry grass, was a small, tight knot of twine. It was not a rancher's simple hitch. It was complex, a series of interwoven loops that formed a perfect, tiny ball. She dropped to her knees. Her fingers, raw as they were, trembled as she touched it. "Matthew?" she whispered. The name was a prayer. "He was a sailor. Years ago, before he came west. He worked on the packet ships out of Boston. He taught me this knot." She looked up at Kohana, her eyes shining with a fierce, sudden wetness. "He called it a monkey's fist. He said it was for luck. He is alive, and he left this for me. He knew I would look." Kohana nodded. The sign was clear. "He is alive, and he leaves a trail." He looked north, at the 2 sets of tracks leading out of the Narrows. One, the wider set, followed the survey line for the Santa Fe Railroad. The other, barely visible, cut northeast into the broken land. Before he could speak, a new voice echoed from the rocks above them. "They are not where you think, Kohana." Kohana spun, his hand not moving to his knife, but his body instantly coiled. Evelyn scrambled to her feet, her heart leaping into her throat. A man stepped out from a shadow between 2 boulders. He was dressed in buckskins. Not Comanche, he was tall, lean, and carried a long rifle with a quiet authority. He moved with the same fluid silence as Kohana. Kohana relaxed, though only slightly. "Joe Running Fox," he said. "It has been many seasons," the man said. He had a deep, calm voice. He nodded respectfully to Evelyn. "Ma'am." "You saw them?" Kohana said. It was not a question. "I saw them." Joe Running Fox said. "He was Kiowa. He had hunted this land for 30 years. I have been trailing Pike's wagons for a month. They left a dead horse by a waterhole near my winter camp. They are a poison." He spat on the ground. "Do not follow the main tracks. That is a decoy. A few empty wagons to make noise. He sent his circus car north." He pointed to the faint tracks. "Toward the San Miguel diggings. He is avoiding the railroad patrols. He is avoiding everyone." "Why are you telling us this?" Evelyn asked, her suspicion a sharp edge. Joe Running Fox looked at Kohana, a small smile touching his lips. "He and I chased the same buffalo, long ago. He is a brother, even if his mother did not have the same face as mine." He looked back at Evelyn. "And I do not like men who build cages." He tossed Kohana a thick stick of dried, pounded jerky. "They are moving fast, but their wagons are heavy. They cannot hide those tracks from a man who knows how to look. Be careful, my friend. Pike has eyes everywhere. That man, the one with the broken hand, he rides with them." Joe Running Fox nodded once, then stepped back. He did not turn. He simply melted into the rocks and was gone. They rode north. The land changed. It grew harder, more broken. The jerky was tough, but it was food. The water in their skins was low. By the next evening, they reached the edge of the San Miguel mining camp. It was not a town. It was a scar on the landscape, a raw collection of canvas tents, tin shacks, and one long, false-fronted building that called itself a trading post. The sound of a drunken piano and loud, slurred voices spilled out into the dusk. Kohana pulled his horse to a stop. He did not like this place. It was the same noise as Esperanza. "Wait here," he told Evelyn. "I will get the supplies." "No," she said. She was stiff, tired, and covered in filth, but the sight of Matthew's knot had forged something new in her. "I am not a child to be hidden. We need flour, cartridges, and jerky. We will go together." She slid off the mule before he could protest and walked toward the trading post. Kohana sighed, a sound that was just a sharp exhale, and followed her. He was a broad-shouldered shadow at her back. The moment they stepped inside, the noise stopped. The store was full of men, miners with dirt ground into their faces and a half-dozen cowboys, drunk and loud. From one of the big ranches to the south, all of them stared. The miners looked at Kohana, their eyes filled with a flat, weary hatred. The cowboys looked at Evelyn, their gazes stripping her bare. "Get what you need," Kohana said, his voice a low rumble just for her. He moved to the door, his arms crossed over his chest. He did not lean. He stood, his body a silent, solid block of muscle. Evelyn walked to the counter. A small, nervous man with spectacles hurried to help her. "Flour, salt, and cartridges for a 30-30 Winchester." One of the cowboys, a large man with a red, sweat-slicked face, laughed. He swaggered over, his spurs ringing on the floorboards. Well, look at this. An Indian buying rifle shells. And who is this your teacher?" He drawled the word, making it sound foul. His friend joined him. "Hey, my friend here was just telling me he saw Pike's circus pass through here 2 nights ago. He said Pike had a whole new stable of actresses. Pretty little things. Bet you'd fetch a high price at that auction, ma'am." Evelyn turned. She did not flinch. She did not flush. She looked the man directly in the eye, her voice as clear and cold as the spring water in Kohana's canyon. "Are you implying, sir, that a woman's worth is something to be determined at an auction?" The man's grin faltered, confused by her lack of fear. "I assure you," she continued, her voice cutting through the sudden quiet of the store, "my value is in my education. It is a commodity that your small mind and foul mouth seem entirely unable to grasp. Now, if you will excuse me, I have business." The cowboy's face turned a dark, blotchy purple. "Why, you stuck up." He reached for her, his hand wide. Kohana moved. He did not speak. He did not draw his knife. He simply uncrossed his arms and stepped forward, placing his body directly between Evelyn and the cowboy. He was inches from the man's face. He was shorter than the cowboy, but he seemed to take up all the air in the room. He did not look angry. He did not look afraid. He just looked. His black eyes were flat, deep, and empty. He just stood there. He just breathed. The cowboy, his hand still raised, found his whiskey-fueled courage drying up. He was looking at a man who was not threatening him. He was looking at a man who was a fact, like a rock or a blizzard. He saw nothing in those eyes he understood, and it terrified him. He sputtered, "Ah, hell, she ain't worth my time anyway." He grabbed his friend, and the group of them backed out of the store, trying to save face with loud, empty boasts. The nervous store owner practically threw the flour and cartridges into a sack. Evelyn paid with one of her last few coins. As they were turning to leave, a new voice stopped them. "Wait, child." From the back of the store, where sacks of beans were piled high, an old man emerged. He was a black man, tall and thin, with a cloud of brilliant white hair. He wore a preacher's collar, frayed and white-washed but clean. His face was a map of deep lines, but his eyes were bright and kind. "Reverend Amos," he said, introducing himself. His voice was a deep, warm bass that resonated in the room. He looked at Kohana, then at Evelyn. "I saw what you did, child. You spoke with the spine of righteousness." He nodded to Kohana. "And you, sir, you stand like a man who knows the cost of things, like a wall." "What do you want?" Reverend Kohana asked. He was still tense, his body angled toward the door, ready for the cowboys to return. "I know why you are here," Amos said quietly. "You are hunting Felix Pike." At the name, the store owner flinched and disappeared into the back room. "I saw his wagons. He came here to buy water, and his men terrorized my miners. He is a blight on this land." He reached into the pocket of his worn black coat and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It was a map, drawn in charcoal. "This is not Pike's territory," the Reverend said. "This is God's, and sometimes God's children need a little help." He spread the map on the counter. "These are the old water stations, the ones my people used long ago when they were traveling north to freedom. They are hidden, springs, seeps, and cisterns. Pike does not know them. His wagons will have to stay on the main track, but you can cut across the high mesa. This map will save you a full day. It may let you get ahead of him." Evelyn took the map. "Why are you doing this? You heard those men? It is dangerous." "Pike's men took a girl from my congregation, back in Kansas. She thought she was coming west to be a church organist," Amos said, his eyes full of a deep, ancient sadness. "He calls them actresses. The world calls them lost. God calls them children. Go with speed, and go with God's grace." They left the trading post and rode out of San Miguel, the hateful piano music fading behind them. They followed the Reverend's map, which took them up onto a high, windswept mesa. The silence returned, stretching between them. Mustang Narrows was far behind them. Evelyn felt the unspoken tension. He had fulfilled his bargain. She had to give him his freedom. "Sir," she said, her voice small against the wind, "you have done what you promised. You brought me to the Narrows. I will not hold you to anything more. I can follow this map." She was lying. She was terrified. She could not do this alone. But her pride and the memory of their agreement demanded she offer him the exit. Kohana rode on for a long time, the only sound the clop of the mule's hooves on the rock. The hawk was still with them, a dark speck against the setting sun. Finally, he spoke, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "I do not make promises I do not keep." Evelyn's brow furrowed. I do not understand." "The bargain was to the Narrows," he said, his voice flat. "That bargain is done. This," he gestured to the trail ahead, "is new. This is not a bargain." He did not say what it was. He did not say he was staying. He just kept riding, and he did not turn back. It was enough. The map led them to a river. It was not wide, but the storm had turned it into a fast, churning chute of brown water. The bridge that had once crossed it was a ruin. 2 main beams, slick with mud, remained, but the planks had been washed away. Kohana dismounted. He walked to the edge. He studied the current. He waded in. The water surged, pulling at him, rising to his waist. It was strong, but the bottom was gravel. He came back out, water streaming from his leggings. "The animals cannot cross here," he said. "The current will take them. We lose half a day to go around." Evelyn looked at the raging water. "So what do we do?" He looked at her. He stood directly in front of her, his face unreadable. The air crackled with the breaking of their primary rule. "The rules have changed," he said, his voice low and formal. "I must carry you. There is no other way to cross." She stared at him. This was the touch they had forbidden. This was not a grab in a saloon or an arm to pull her from a storm. This was a choice. She had to put her arms around him. She had to trust him completely. She met his gaze. "I give my consent," she whispered. The word hung in the air, heavy and strange. It was awkward. He was a man of stone, not gentleness. He turned his back to her. "On my back. It is the safest." She hiked up her ruined skirts, her face burning. She climbed on, her hands hesitating before she wrapped her arms around his neck. Her face was pressed against the rough, damp wool of his shirt. He smelled of leather, horse, and the sharp, clean scent of juniper. His body was hard as the river rock, his muscles tense beneath her hands. He grunted as he took her weight, then stepped into the river. The crossing was a nightmare. The water was colder than ice, and its power was terrifying. It tore at his legs, trying to pull them both under. He moved with a slow, grinding, unstoppable power. His feet found purchase on the slick stones, his legs bracing against the torrent. He did not waver. He was a piece of the earth, refusing to be moved. He reached the far bank and set her down. She slid off his back, her hands lingering on his shoulders for a moment, her legs trembling too much to stand. He stepped back immediately, as if her touch burned him, putting a yard of space between them. Both of them were breathing hard, their breath pluming in the cold air. "Thank you," she managed to say. He just nodded. He turned and waded back through the violent water to get the supplies and lead his Mustang across. While he was gone, Evelyn stumbled to a calm eddy by the bank. She bent to splash water on her face and saw her reflection. She recoiled. The woman looking back at her was a stranger. Her hair was a wild, tangled mat of leaves and dirt. Her face was streaked with grime. Her lips cracked. Her fine wool dress was torn at the shoulder and stained with mud. She looked like a madwoman. The teacher from Philadelphia, the woman who believed in order, was gone. This feral creature was what was left. She felt a hot sting of shame. Kohana returned, dropping the heavy saddlebags. He saw her staring into the water. He saw the shame on her face. He stopped a few feet away. "Do not be ashamed of the dust," he said, his voice quiet. She looked up, startled. "The dust proves you are moving forward," he said. "It proves you are not standing still. It proves you are alive." She stared at him. It was the simplest and kindest thing anyone had ever said to her. A small, fragile seed of trust, planted in the cabin, began to put down a root. He turned to pack the mule. He was lashing the last bag when he saw it. Nailed to a cottonwood tree, right on the trail where they could not miss it, was a piece of raw, untanned deer hide. Pinned to the hide, driven deep into the wood, was a long, thin knife, and pinned by the knife, gleaming white against the bark, was a single goose feather, the kind used to make a quill pen. Evelyn saw it and walked closer. "What is it?" "A warning," Kohana said. His voice had gone cold. It was hard as the flint in his sheath. "The feather. It is for the Reverend, the man with the map." He recognized the knife. The hilt was notched in a way he had seen before. He pulled it from the tree. "This is Bowie Sam's knife," he said. They had found Amos. They had tracked him down, just for helping them. They had left this message, a threat, a promise. Evelyn felt sick. This is my fault. He helped us, and now—" "No," Kohana said. He held the knife in his hand, its weight familiar. "This is Pike's fault. He did this." He looked at the knife. He looked at Evelyn. He looked north, in the direction the map pointed. His mother had told him to be the stone, to keep his silence. But this was not a storm. This was a poison. This was a rot that spread, touching everyone, even a good man in a dusty mining camp. Pike had come into his world. He had threatened the innocent. He had brought the noise of cages and the smell of fear to the high plains. Kohana's silence was no longer a shield. It was a failure. He made the decision. He was no longer a guide. He was no longer a man in hiding. He sheathed Bowie Sam's knife next to his own. He turned and handed the reins of the mule to Evelyn. "We ride," he said. His voice was different. The detachment was gone, burned away. In its place was a cold, sharp-edged purpose that frightened her and gave her strength. "We ride together." The word "together" changed the air. It was no longer a bargain. It was a bond, as hard and sharp as the knife on Kohana's belt. He had crossed a line, and there was no going back to his quiet canyon. The Reverend's map was a true and holy thing. It led them to water where there should have been none. Up dry arroyos and over high, wind-swept mesas. They moved with a speed that wagons could not match. They bypassed the main muddy trail and gained a full day on Pike's Decoy. They came to Las Cruces at dusk on the second day. It was not a town, but a wound on the prairie. A raw collection of buildings, put up fast and cheap to serve the coming railroad. There was a water tower, a telegraph office, and a long, low warehouse made of new, unpainted pine. A sign, dripping paint, announced Felix Pike and Company, storage. He left Evelyn and the animals hidden in a deep, dry arroyo. 100 yards from the buildings. "Wait here," he said. "Do not move. Do not make a sound." She nodded. She was not the same woman he had pulled from the storm. Her face was grim, her eyes hard. "I will wait. Be careful." Kohana moved like smoke, bent low, using the rising shadows as cover. He circled the warehouse. It was quiet. A single padlock, new and cheap, was on the main sliding door. He did not need to break it to know what was inside. The wind carried the proof. It was the smell of the railroad, of coal smoke and hot axle grease. But under it, thick and cloying, was another smell. It was cheap, sweet perfume, the kind that hung in the air at the Red Calf, and the smell of talcum powder, and something else, something sharp and acidic, the unmistakable, foul stench of human fear. He found a crack between two ill-fitting boards and put his eye to it. The interior was dark, but stripes of light cut through from knotholes and gaps in the roof. He saw shapes, crates, large wooden crates, stacked 3 high. They were not made for cargo. He saw the small, round holes, drilled in rows near the tops, air holes. He slid back to the arroyo. Evelyn looked at his face. "It is them." "It is their cargo," he said. "The wagons are not here, but the people are." He led her back, keeping low to the ground. He looked at the padlock. He pulled Bowie Sam's heavy knife from his belt. He did not try to pick the lock. He jammed the tip of the knife into the shackle and threw his entire weight onto it. The cheap metal groaned and then snapped. He slid the heavy door open. The sound was a low rumble on the dirt floor. The smell inside was a physical blow. It was perfume and powder and sweat and waste. Evelyn gagged, her hand flying to her mouth. They stepped into the gloom. The crates were marked with stenciled letters. Scenery. Costumes. "They are monsters," Evelyn whispered. On a small, rough table, a lantern sat next to a stack of papers. She picked up the top sheet. Show roster. It read. It was a list of names. Female names. Mary, Anna, Sarah. Her breath hitched. "Sarah Malone, she is here." Next to the list was a small, lace-edged handkerchief, stained with rust-colored drops. Then they heard it. It was not a word. It was a scraping sound. From the largest crate in the darkest corner. A low, choked sound. Half sob, half growl. Kohana was at the crate in 2 strides. It was not padlocked. It was barred with a thick wooden beam, dropped into iron brackets. He put his shoulder to it, heaving it up. He pulled the bar free and threw it to the ground. He yanked the crate door open. For a long second, nothing, just a deeper black. Then, a figure lunged out, not in weakness, but in attack. A small body, flying at him, a sharpened piece of wood clutched like a dagger. He caught the wrist, stopping the blow. He did not use force. He just held it, immovable as stone. It was a woman. She was young, perhaps 20. She was not Sarah Malone. She was Cheyenne. Her dark hair was matted with filth, her buckskin dress torn. She was starving, her face a hollow mask of bone. But her eyes burned with a fire that had not died. She looked at Kohana. She saw his face, his hair, the medicine in a pouch around his neck. Her body, which had been rigid with hate, suddenly slumped. She spoke in her own language, her voice a dry rasp. They said they were all white. Kohana replied in a dialect she understood. We are not them. We are here to free you. The woman's name was Willa. She collapsed, her legs giving way. Evelyn rushed to her, catching her before she hit the floor. She unhooked her own water skin and held it to Willa's lips. Willa drank, her movements jerky, but controlled. She was a survivor. Where are the others? Evelyn asked, her voice tight with urgency. My brother Matthew, the girl, Sarah. Willa shook her head, coughing as the water hit her dry throat. They move us, in pieces. This is the collection. For the new ones. She looked at Kohana, her gaze sharp, assessing. She pushed herself up, refusing Evelyn's help. The show, it is at Fort Elliott. That is the big one. That is where Pike. He auctions the new actors. The soldiers come. They have money. They pay. Fort Elliott. The name hit Kohana like a fist. His old post, the place where he had worn the blue coat. We have to go, Evelyn said, pulling Willa to her feet. They will be back. They are already here, Kohana said. He had not moved from the doorway. He was listening. A horse, one horse, riding hard, stopping outside. Hide, he commanded. His voice was a whip. He pushed Evelyn and Willa behind a tall stack of empty crates. He stepped back, melting into the deepest shadow by the doorframe, his mother's gray flint knife sliding into his hand. The door scraped open, throwing a long rectangle of harsh sunlight onto the floor. A man stood silhouetted. He held a pistol in his left hand. His right arm was bound in a crude, dirty sling. It was Bowie Sam. He stepped inside, his eyes struggling to adjust to the dim light. He saw the broken padlock in the dirt. He saw the open, empty crate. I knew it, he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. I knew that damn scout was... He never finished the sentence. Kohana moved from the shadow. He was not a man. He was a force. He did not go for the gun hand. He exploded from the darkness, his shoulder crashing into Sam's chest. The move was pure, focused power. It lifted the larger man off his feet and drove him backward, out of the warehouse, into the bright sunlight. The pistol fired, the sound deafening, the bullet going wild, screaming off the iron railroad track. They fell, rolling in the dust. Sam was heavy, a brawler, but he was one-handed and surprised. Kohana was faster, his movements economical and brutal. Sam tried to bring the pistol around for another shot, but Kohana was inside his guard. Too close. He brought the heel of his hand up, striking Sam's wrist. The pistol clattered on the gravel. Sam roared in pain and rage. He tried to grab Kohana with his one good hand, to pull him into a crushing embrace. Kohana twisted. He seized Sam's broken right arm, the one in the sling. He used it as a lever. Sam screamed, a high, thin sound as the bone ground together. Kohana used the man's own momentum to throw him face down in the dirt. In one fluid motion, Kohana was on his back, a knee pinning Sam's good arm to the ground. He was helpless. Willa and Evelyn ran out of the warehouse, stopping, stunned. Kill him, Willa said. Her voice was flat, dead. He is one of them. He is the one who locks the doors. Kill him. Kohana looked down at the man sputtering in the dust. He saw the wet, animal terror in Sam's eyes. He could do it. He could draw the flint blade across the man's throat and end it. It would be easy. But he thought of his mother. Be the stone. He thought of the Reverend Amos. This was not justice. This was just killing. He would not kill him, but he would mark him. He kept his knee on Sam's back. He took Bowie Sam's good left hand and spread it flat on the hard wood of the railroad tie. Sam began to buck and curse. "No, what are you doing? Please!" Kohana pinned the man's sleeve to the wood with Sam's own knife, driving it deep. Then he drew his own. The gray flint. He held it up, the stone catching the sun. "This is the mark of my mother," Kohana said, his voice low and cold. "You will carry it, so Felix Pike knows who is coming for him." He did not cut deep. He did not maim. He drew the razor-sharp edge of the flint across the back of Sam's hand. From the knuckle to the wrist, it was a long, clean, shallow line. A boundary. His boundary. Blood welled up, dark red against the skin. Kohana stood up. He left Bowie Sam pinned to the track, screaming, "Let us go, now!" They ran for the arroyo. As they reached the animals, a new voice called out, "Señorita!" An old Mexican man, a yard keeper, was waving at them from behind the water tower. He looked terrified, but he stood his ground. Evelyn ran to him. The young man," the old man whispered, his eyes darting toward the warehouse. "The one they make shovel the coal. He gave me this. He said if a woman came asking for him, a woman with his eyes, I must give it to her." He pressed a small object into her hand. It was a single, polished seashell, strung on a piece of rawhide. A charm, the kind Matthew used to buy for her at the docks in Boston when they were children. Her knees went weak. "He is alive. He is on the engine," the old man whispered, crossing himself. "They moved him from the circus car to the black car. He shovels coal. They watch him every minute. Vaya con Dios, señorita. Go with God." They rode hard, leaving the tracks and Bowie Sam's fading curses behind them. They had a new member. Willa rode the mule, her small body set with a grim, hard purpose. The dynamic had changed. It was no longer two, it was three. The air was colder, sharper. They made a cold camp that night, far from any trail, with no fire. Kohana had sniffed the wind earlier. His head lifted like an animal. "Snow," he said. "Snow," Evelyn had said, her voice full of disbelief. "It is not yet October." "This is the high plains," he had replied. "The weather does not follow your rules." Now they sat in the dark, the three of them, chewing the last of the dry jerky. The silence was stretched thin, full of the day's violence. Willa sat apart, sharpening a small knife she had produced from her boot. Evelyn was shaking, not from the cold. She was holding the seashell charm in her pocket, its smooth surface a terrible, tangible link to Matthew. From the darkness, a high, lonely sound. A wolf, calling from a distant ridge. It was a long, mournful cry that ripped through the quiet. Evelyn made a small, choked sound. It was not a wolf to her. It was a scream. It was Sarah Malone in the crate. It was Matthew in the black car. It was the sound of a human soul in unbearable pain. She began to breathe in short, shallow gasps. The 4-4 count was gone. She was losing her anchor. Kohana saw it. He was bound by his own rule. He did not move. Evelyn looked at him, a shadow against the dark rocks. Her hand, the one with the faded bruises, was shaking so hard she could barely control it. "Sir," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Kohana, may I hold your hand, please, just for a moment?" The request was a shock. It was a plea that crossed the line they had drawn. Willa's head turned, her sharp eyes watching. Kohana stared at Evelyn. He saw her desperation. He saw her, a woman of rules and order, fighting to hold on to her sanity. This was not an assumption. This was not a grab. This was a question. If anything must change, it will be spoken. She had spoken. He slowly, almost awkwardly, held out his hand. His palm was rough, calloused as a river stone. She took it. Her hand was ice cold, trembling violently. She gripped his hand, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a world that was dissolving. It was clumsy. It was not a gentle touch. It was a desperate, human anchor. He did not pull away. He let her hold his hand. After a long minute, he felt the trembling in her fingers lessen. He heard her breathing slow down, the ragged gasps turning into a willed, steady rhythm. The 4-4 count had returned. He looked at her in the dark. "Kohana," he said, his voice a low rumble. "My name." She nodded, her grip still tight. "Kohana." He held her hand for another moment, then spoke, his voice very soft, but very clear. He was not speaking just to her. He was speaking to himself. He was restating the law that now bound them all. "I do not take what is not given." She squeezed his hand, a small, answering pressure. "I know," she whispered. "That is why I asked." She finally let go. The moment was broken. Kohana stood up. He looked to the north. The stars were gone, swallowed by a high, fast-moving blanket of gray clouds. The air was sharp, and it smelled of iron and ice. "Fort Elliott," he said. "Willa is right. That is the place." He looked at the two women, one shattered by this world, the other forged into a weapon by it. "It is 3 days' ride, but this weather, we must ride now. We must beat the storm, and we must beat Pike." He turned his face to the north, toward the fort he had once served, and the unseasonable, impossible snow that was racing to meet them. They rode for 2 days, a grim, silent trio against a sky that had turned from gray to a bruised, heavy purple. The cold was not a simple lack of heat. It was a physical weight, a presence that pressed against them, sharp as iron. Kohana had been right. The storm did not follow rules. It was a king, and it was coming for its throne on the high plains. He had pushed them, the horses and the mule, to their limit. The air grew thinner, and the wind began to whistle, a low, keening sound that got under Evelyn's cloak and into her bones. "There," Kohana said, his voice snatched by the wind. He pointed. It was a small, dark shape against the rising white landscape. A cabin, not a home, like his. This was a Forest Service line shack, a simple box of logs meant for rangers to survive a single night. It was shelter. They reached it just as the first flakes, hard and fast as pellets of ice, began to fly. The wind was not a breeze, it was a solid wall of noise, a shrieking, deafening roar that swallowed all other sound. Kohana threw himself from his Mustang and tried the door. It was frozen shut, the wood swollen with ice. He put his shoulder to it, but it did not budge. Willa, small and fierce, joined him, adding her weight. Nothing. "Stand back!" Kohana yelled over the gale. He stepped back and kicked. He did not kick the lock. He kicked the frame, just beside the handle. A short, brutal, powerful stomp. The wood screamed and splintered. He kicked again. The jamb broke, and the door flew inward, crashing against the cabin wall. They stumbled inside, pushing the animals in with them. The cabin was one small room, barely big enough for the 3 of them and the 3 animals. The air was frigid, but it was still. The roar of the wind was muffled to a high, terrible whistle that seeped through the cracks in the logs. Kohana fought the door, using his flint knife to wedge a broken piece of the jamb back into place, securing it against the storm. Willa, moving with an automatic, practiced efficiency, began checking the cabin. She found a small, rusted stove, a pile of dry wood left by the last ranger, and a box of matches. Within minutes, she had a small, sputtering fire going. The light was weak, but it was light. Evelyn slid down the wall, her back to the rough logs. She pulled her knees to her chest, her body shaking so hard her teeth chattered. The animals stamped nervously, their breath pluming in the tiny room. The cabin was a trap. It was a small, dark box, and the wind was trying to get in. The wind did not just blow. It groped at the cabin. It slammed against the walls in great rhythmic gusts. It shrieked at the stovepipe. It was the sound of a giant, enraged animal, trying to tear their shelter apart. And it was the sound of the train. For Evelyn. The line between the present and the past dissolved. The rhythmic slamming was the clack, clack, clack of the wheels on the track. The high, whistling shriek was the engine's boiler. The sound she had heard just before the man grabbed her at the station in Missouri. The man who had... She put her hands over her ears, but it did not stop the sound. It was inside her. She was back in the alley. She was back in the dark, cramped boxcar. The smell of unwashed bodies and fear. She could not breathe. The 4-4 count was gone. Panic, cold and absolute, was flooding her lungs. She tried to muffle the sound, to scream into her own cloak. She was making small, terrible, animal noises, soft whimpers, bitten back, the sound of a soul in a trap. Willa looked over, her face hard, her eyes pitiless. She had seen this before. She turned back to the fire. Kohana saw it. He saw Evelyn, her eyes wide and blind with terror, her knuckles white as she tore at her own clothes. She was not in the cabin. She was somewhere else, somewhere far worse. He moved. He did not hesitate. He crossed the small room and knelt in front of her. His own rules, his own boundaries, were warring with the immediate, desperate need of the woman in front of him. He held his hands up, palms out, just as he had in his own cabin. "Evelyn," he said, his voice low and firm, cutting through her panic. "You are not there. You are here. You are in the cabin. You are with me." She did not hear him. Her sobs were choking her. He had to break the rule. He had to anchor her. "I am going to touch your shoulder," he said, his voice clear, precise. "I am asking your permission. I will put my hand on your shoulder. Nod if you hear me." She could not. She was lost. He did it anyway. He reached out, slowly, and placed his hand on her shoulder. The touch was firm, heavy, and solid. It was not gentle. It was an anchor. "Breathe," he commanded. "Breathe with me. 4 counts, like before. In." She flinched at the touch, a violent full-body recoil, but she did not pull away. The solid weight of his hand was a fact. It was not the grasping, violent touch of her memory. It was just heavy. It was just there. He began laying out the bedrolls, his movements economical, his hand still on her shoulder. He took his own heavy woolen coat, the one he wore against the worst weather, and unfolded it. He draped it around her, cocooning her. "You are safe," he said. "The wind is the wind. It is not the train. It is just the sky. I am here." He guided her breathing. "In, 2, 3, 4. Hold it. Out, 2, 3, 4. She was still crying, but the sound was changing. The whimpers were turning into sobs. The sobs were turning into shuddering breaths. She was coming back. Her hand, which had been clutching her cloak, moved. It was a slow, deliberate motion. She reached out and found his wrist. His skin was warm against her cold fingers. She did not just touch him. She gripped him. She held his wrist, her knuckles white. Then, her eyes still squeezed shut, she gave a single, sharp nod. It was not a surrender. It was an answer. It was consent. It was, "Yes, stay." He did not move. He knelt there, in the dirt, for a very long time, his hand on her shoulder, her hand gripping his wrist. Willa watched them for a moment, her expression unreadable. And then she turned back to the fire, giving them their privacy. The night wore on. The wind screamed. The horses stamped. But inside the cabin, a different, fragile silence had formed. Hours later, her breathing was even. She was asleep, her hand still locked on his wrist. He did not pull away. He sat, immobile as the stone he had been named for, and watched the fire. She woke near dawn. The wind had lessened to a low moan. The fire was just embers. She woke slowly, aware of the warmth of his coat and the solid, living presence of his arm. Her hand was still holding his. She let go, her face burning with embarrassment. She pulled back. "I am sorry," she whispered into the cold air. He did not look at her. He looked at the fire. "Do not be. You did not break." I am so afraid," she admitted, the words tasting like ash. "I am afraid of being touched. I am afraid of being trapped. I thought I was strong enough. But that sound—" "You are strong enough," he said. He finally turned to look at her. His dark eyes were clear, and there was no pity in them. There was only a deep, profound understanding. "You were strong enough to ask for help." "I did not," she whispered. I grabbed you." "You nodded," he corrected her. "You spoke." He held up his hand, the one she had held. "I am not him. I am not the men who grab. I am not the men who take. I am not the wind that tears at the door." He paused, finding the words, forming a new promise. For her, and for himself. "I am the wall," he said. "I am the wall that stands against it. I will not be the one who harms you." She looked at him, really seeing him. Not as a guide, not as a savage, but as a man who had built his entire life around a wall, and who was now inviting her to stand behind it with him. "I know," she said. Her voice was steady. "I am not afraid of you, Kohana. I am just afraid. I want to learn how to trust again. How to be in my own skin without feeling like it is a trap." "Then you will," he said. It was a fact. "You will breathe. You will move forward. The dust will prove it." The moment was broken by a new sound, a sharp, clear thump on the cabin door. Kohana was on his feet, the flint knife in his hand, in a single, silent motion. Willa was already standing, her own small blade ready. "Who is it?" Kohana called. "Who is it?" Kohana called. "It is a friend," a low voice replied. "One who does not like to be this cold. And your horse looks hungry." Kohana unbarred the door. The new light of morning, bright and blindingly white, flooded the cabin. The world was gone, buried under 2 feet of perfect, unbroken snow. Standing in that snow, wrapped in a heavy buffalo robe, was Joe Running Fox. "You are a hard man to find, Kohana," the Kiowa tracker said, a small smile on his face. He looked at the small, cramped cabin, the 3 nervous animals, and the 2 women. "And you have found interesting company." "How did you find us?" Kohana asked, letting him in. "I saw the storm coming. I knew you were heading for the fort. This is the only solid shelter between here and the Canadian River." Joe said, "I followed your trail until the snow hit. Then I waited. I figured you were smart enough to get in out of the wind." He accepted a piece of jerky from Willa, nodding his thanks. "The snow has changed things. It has covered your trail completely." "And pikes?" Evelyn asked, pulling Kohana's coat tighter around her. "Covered," Joe said. "But he has wagons. They will be slow. And he has a destination. Fort Elliott." He looked at Willa, his eyes sharp. "You are Cheyenne. You are one of his." "I was," Willa said, her voice hard. "Never again." Joe nodded, a silent understanding passing between them. "Good." Kohana looked at the other tracker. "We need to get to the fort." "We will," Joe said. "But we have lost a day. The snow is deep. We cannot ride as 3. Not fast enough. We must split." Willa stepped forward. I will go to the fort. I can move faster alone." "No," Joe said. "You are strong, but you are one woman. They know your face." He looked at her. "They do not know mine, not as one of theirs. I can go into the fort. I can be a tracker, looking for work from the army. I can listen. I can find where they are keeping your brother. And the girl, Sarah." I will go with you, Willa insisted. I know the faces of the men. I know how they talk. I can be a washwoman. I can be invisible. You will be seen as a warrior. I will be seen as nothing, and nothing hears everything. Joe Running Fox considered her. He saw the iron in her spine. He nodded. It is a good plan. 2 mice are quieter than 1 wolf. Kohana looked at Evelyn. This was the moment. He had to separate from her. You will stay here, he said. No, Evelyn said. She stood up, letting his heavy coat fall from her shoulders. She was wearing her own ruined dress, but she was no longer the trembling woman from the night before. She was a teacher. She was a woman with a purpose. I am not staying. My brother is on the train. The black car. The yard keeper said, that means he is with the engine. The engine runs on the tracks. I am going to the tracks. Kohana stared at her. It is too dangerous. It was too dangerous in Esperanza, she said. It was too dangerous in the warehouse. It is too dangerous here. She looked at the snow. This is a problem, but it is also an opportunity. Pike is blind. He thinks we are behind him. But if we cut across, we can be ahead of him. We can get to the tracks first. What do you see? Kohana asked Joe, his respect for Evelyn's mind growing. Joe Running Fox nodded. She is right. The snow is a gift. The main tracks are 2 days' ride from here. If you follow the river, you two, he motioned to Kohana and Evelyn, can get there before Pike's wagons dig themselves out. You can find this black car. He looked at Kohana. It is the only way. Willa and I will go to the fort. We will find the nest. You, he said. You will find the boy. Kohana looked at the tracks in the snow, near the cabin, half covered by the new drift. He saw them. They were faint, but undeniable. The half-moon shape of an unshod hoof, a plains pony. We were not alone last night, Kohana said, his voice low. Joe Running Fox went to the door and looked. He saw the tracks. No, he said. You were not. Pike has his own trackers, and they are good. They did not shelter. They watched. Then we must move, Kohana said. He grabbed the saddlebags. The plan is made. Joe, Willa, you go to Fort Elliott. Find the circus car. Find Sarah. He turned to Evelyn. We will go to the tracks. We will find Matthew. He looked at the 2 trackers, Joe and Willa, a Kiowa, a Cheyenne, and a Comanche. They were 3 people, scattered by a war that had taken their world. Now they were united. Willa told her story as they packed, her voice flat and cold. She spoke of another impresario, a man like Pike. She spoke of her older sister, who had created a diversion, who had faced the man's whip so that Willa could slide out the back of a wagon and into the night. She died, Willa said, her voice without emotion. She died so I could be free. I will not let her death be for nothing. I will free as many as I can. I will burn their cages to the ground. Kohana, Joe, and Evelyn listened. They were no longer 3 separate people. They were an army. Joe and Willa, light and fast, took the mule and headed northeast, toward the fort. Kohana and Evelyn, on the Mustang, headed west, toward the unseen line of the railroad. The snow was deep, but the sun was bright, and the cold, clean air was the smell of a new, and far more dangerous, day. The snow was a temporary truce. It was a white, silent world that hid the tracks of both the hunters and the hunted. Kohana and Evelyn rode west for 2 days, the Mustang breaking trail through the deep drifts, its breath a cloud of steam. The cold was a constant, aching misery. They spoke little, saving their strength. Evelyn was no longer a passenger. She was a partner. She watched the land as he did, her eyes scanning for movement, for the black, ugly line of the railroad tracks. They found the tracks cutting a raw wound through the white landscape. There was a telegraph line, a single strand of iron wire. humming in the cold. It was the voice of the New World, a sound Kohana despised. They followed the tracks south toward Fort Elliott. They moved in the dark and rested during the day, hiding in the rocky breaks, far from the line. They saw the train before they heard it, a pillar of black smoke rising into the clean white air. It was Pike's, a long train, with his vulgar red and gold circus cars, and a heavy engine at the front, pushing a snowplow. Kohana watched it pass, his face grim. "He is here." They skirted the fort, a massive, imposing square of timber and stone, and met Joe, Running Fox, and Willa in a designated stand of pine trees. The reunion was tense, their faces grim. "He is here," Joe said, confirming Kohana's sighting. "He has the ear of a Captain Miller, a man with a taste for whiskey and Pike's money. They are partners. The auction is tomorrow. He is calling it a company celebration for the soldiers." "Matthew?" Evelyn's voice was a raw whisper. "He is here," Willa said. Her time in the fort had sharpened her. She was no longer just a victim. She was an intelligence officer. "We found the roster. They list him as equipment manager. It is a lie. He is forced labor. Joe saw him, under guard, moving coal." "And Sarah Malone?" Evelyn asked. Willa's face hardened. "She is in the circus car, the one with no windows. They are holding her for the auction." "We cannot just attack." Joe said, "The fort is a box. The captain will have his soldiers on Pike's side. We will be shot for mutiny before we get within 20 feet of the train." "We need a different kind of weapon," Willa said. She looked at Evelyn. "Come with me. There is someone you must meet." Willa led Evelyn not into the fort, but to the collection of tents and sod huts huddled outside the walls, a place the soldiers called Sudsville. It was where the laundresses, the families, and the dispossessed lived. Willa stopped at a tent with a red cross crudely painted on the flap. Inside, it was clean and smelled of lye soap and herbal remedies. A woman was tending to a child with a fever. She was tall, her black hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her face was a strong, beautiful mix of Mexican and Apache blood. "Evelyn Hart, this is Sister Maria," Willa said. Maria finished with the child, giving the mother a small packet of herbs. She turned, her eyes dark and assessing. "Willa said you were coming. You are the one looking for your brother." "Yes," Evelyn said. "They say you can help." "Perhaps," Maria said. She had no time for pleasantries. My cousin, she came here from Santa Fe. She was young. She thought she was coming to be a seamstress for the captain's wife. She vanished 2 days later. I saw her, through a crack in the side of that circus car. Pike's men caught me. They broke my arm. They told me I saw nothing." She went to a small wooden chest and unlocked it. She pulled out a small, square piece of glass. It was a photographic plate. "I am a nurse," Maria said, her voice shaking with a cold, controlled rage. "But I am also a photographer. I document the plants, the herbs, and sometimes I document the sickness." She held the plate up to the light of the tent flap. It was a blurry image, taken from a distance, but it was undeniable. It showed a row of faces, pale and desperate, peering through a small, barred opening. It was a cage on wheels. "This is my proof," Maria said. "But the captain laughed at me. He said it was a trick of the light. He tore up my print, but I kept the glass." Evelyn looked at the faces in the glass. This is the weapon." The plan was audacious. It was not a military strike. It was a social one. Kohana and Joe Running Fox would be the shadows. Evelyn would be the voice. Willa and Maria would be the witnesses. The next day, the celebration began. The fort's parade ground was turned into a crude marketplace. Pike's men had set up a stage. Soldiers, miners, and a few brave townspeople mingled, drinking Pike's free whiskey. Captain Miller was on the stage, his arm around Pike, both of them laughing. Kohana, Joe, and the women watched from the edge of the crowd. Kohana hated it. He hated the walls, the smell of the uniforms, the sound of the bugle. It was the place of his shame. "Now," Evelyn said. She did not walk to the stage. She walked to the other side of the parade ground, near the sutler's store, where a group of children, bored by the adult drinking, were throwing rocks. She had a small crate, and she set it on the ground. She stood on it. She pulled out her McGuffey's reader. "Children," she called out, her voice not loud, but clear as a bell, the clear, trained voice of a teacher. "My name is Miss Hart. Would you like to hear a story?" The children stopped. A story. Here they drifted over. A few of the laundresses, Maria among them, came and stood, their arms crossed. A few soldiers, sober and curious, followed. Evelyn opened the book. This is a story about a brave boy who told the truth, even when a king told him to lie. She began to read. Her voice was an island of calm, of order. In the middle of the drunken chaos, the crowd grew. Men who had not heard a decent word spoken in months stopped and listened. They turned their backs on Pike's stage and faced the woman with the book. Pike saw it. He saw his crowd, his audience, melting away. He saw them turning toward her. His face, flushed with whiskey, turned dark. "What is this?" he bellowed, stalking over. Captain Miller and Bowie Sam at his heels. Sam's right hand was heavily bandaged, and his left hand was resting on the butt of his pistol. His eyes were fixed on Kohana, who stood at the back of Evelyn's crowd, his arms crossed, a silent, watchful wall. "This is an unauthorized gathering," Captain Miller slurred, enjoying his small power. "Disperse, ma'am. You are under arrest for—" "For what, Captain?" a new voice cut in. A man stepped out of the sutler's store. He was older, his face lined with sun and worry, and his blue uniform was faded, but the badge on his chest was not military. It was a silver star. "Sheriff Blevins, Fort Elliott civilian jurisdiction. As I see it, the lady is just reading." Pike sneered. "Blevins, stay out of this. This is Army business, and my business." He turned to the crowd, his voice booming into a showman's roar. "You want a show? This teacher is boring you. I will give you a real show." He pointed to a large, covered wagon that had just been pulled onto the parade ground. "Fresh from the East, a brand new actress for my theater. Let us start the bidding at, say, $100. The crowd went silent. The ugliness was out. The pretense was gone. This was the moment. Evelyn slammed her McGuffey's reader shut. The sound was like a gunshot. "No!" she yelled, her voice ringing with the same power as his, but clean. "You will not. This man, Felix Pike, is not a showman. He is a slaver. He is a thief of men and women." The crowd gasped. Captain Miller drew his pistol. "That is sedition. Arrest her." "Wait," Sheriff Blevins said, holding up a hand. He was not a fool, and he was not a bought man. He looked at Evelyn. "Ma'am, that is the strongest accusation a person can make in this territory. You had better have proof." "She has none," Pike laughed, his confidence returning. "She is a lunatic, a woman I spurned." "I have proof," Evelyn said, her voice shaking but strong. "Where?" Pike mocked. "Here," said Joe Running Fox. He stepped out from behind the water trough, holding aloft a large, leather-bound book, Pike's ledger. "You keep very careful records. Mr. Pike. For example, Matthew Hart. Equipment. Debit $100. That is a purchase price, is it not?" Pike's face went white. "And I have this," Maria cried, stepping forward and holding up the glass plate. "The faces of the women in your circus car." "And you have me," Willa screamed, shoving her way to the front. She tore the sleeve of her dress, showing a cattle brand, a P, scarred on her shoulder. "I was his cargo. I was in his crate. He did this to me." The crowd, the sober ones, the decent ones, recoiled in horror. Sheriff Blevins looked at Pike. He looked at the ledger, the photograph, and the branded woman. His hand went to his own pistol. "Felix Pike, under the authority of the New Mexico Territory, you are under arrest for kidnapping and—" He never finished. Pike shoved the captain into the sheriff. Bowie Sam, who had been waiting for this, drew his pistol with his good left hand. He did not aim at the sheriff. He aimed at Kohana. "This is for my hand. You—" He fired. The crowd screamed and scattered. Kohana did not draw his rifle. He did not go for his knife. He had seen the shot coming. He moved in the instant Sam's arm tensed. He grabbed a 50-pound sack of flour from the stack beside him and threw it. The sack hit Sam in the chest. Just as he fired his second shot, the bullet went wide, striking the bugler's horn. Sam staggered back, choking on a cloud of white flour. Before he could raise the pistol a third time, Kohana was on him. He still did not kill. He grabbed Sam's left arm, the one with the gun. He slammed it down, hard, onto the wooden hitching rail. The sound of the bone snapping was loud in the sudden silence. The pistol clattered to the ground. Kohana stepped back. "I will not kill for you," he said, his voice cold. The sheriff's 2 deputies, no longer afraid, piled onto the screaming, flour-coated Sam. "Get him in irons!" Blevins yelled. But in the chaos, Pike was gone, and Matthew was free, while Sam was firing. Joe Running Fox had sprinted to the train. He grabbed a coal shovel, not for the first time, and used its heavy steel to break the lock on the tender's small utility car. He wrenched the door open. A figure, black from head to toe with coal soot, fell out, coughing, his lungs raw. He was thin, his hair matted, but his eyes were alive. "Evie," he rasped. Evelyn, seeing him, cried out, "Matthew." She ran across the parade ground, ignoring the guns, the sheriff, everything. She threw her arms around her brother, her fine wool dress turning black with his dust. He was skeletal, his body shaking, but he was alive. He held her, his face buried in her hair, his body racked with great dry sobs. It was a reunion of 2 ghosts in the middle of a war. "Where is Pike?" Sheriff Blevins yelled, holstering his pistol. Kohana pointed. Felix Pike was on his horse, a lean, fast thoroughbred. He had not run with the crowd. He had run to his escape. He had his heavy saddlebags, his money, and his papers. He sat on his horse at the edge of the parade ground, his face a mask of pure, demonic fury. He looked at Evelyn. He looked at Kohana. "This is not over," he screamed, his voice raw. "You do not know who my friends are. I will be back. I will burn this fort to the ground. I will find all of you." He wheeled the horse, spurred it hard, and vanished in a cloud of dust and snow, heading for the open, lawless plains. The reunion lasted only a second. Matthew was still clinging to his sister, his body shaking. When Kohana's voice cut through the chaos, "Sheriff, his horse." Kohana was already moving. He did not run for his own Mustang. He ran for the nearest fresh horse, a cavalry mount tied to the hitching rail. He did not ask permission. He cut the rope with his flint knife, swung into the military saddle, and dug his heels in. The horse, surprised, lunged forward, scattering the crowd. "Evelyn, stay with your brother," Sheriff Blevins yelled, running for his own horse. "Get him to Sister Maria." But Evelyn was not listening. She looked at her brother, frail and coughing. She looked at the cloud of dust where Pike had vanished. And she looked at Kohana, a lone rider, already 100 yards away, chasing Pike toward the open plains. She made a choice. She was no longer a victim to be protected. She was a partner. "Matthew, go to Maria's tent," she yelled, pushing him toward Willa, who had already taken his arm. "She will help you." Before Matthew could protest, she ran. She did not run for a horse. She ran to the telegraph office. She burst in, terrifying the young operator. "The federal marshal," she yelled. "In Santa Fe, send a wire. Now Felix Pike, wanted for kidnapping and slavery. He has escaped Fort Elliott. He is armed. Send it now." The operator, seeing the fire in her eyes, his fingers trembling, began to tap the key. Kohana rode low, his body one with the cavalry horse. He was a better rider than Pike, but Pike's thoroughbred was faster, built for pure speed. Kohana was not trying to catch him. He was trying to herd him. Pike was racing for the open prairie, for the Llano Estacado, a sea of grass where he could disappear. Kohana knew this land. He knew the one thing that stood between Pike and that open plain, the Canadian River, the deep, massive canyon that cut the territory in half. Pike was fast, but he was riding blind. Kohana knew the passes. He angled his horse, not following Pike directly, but cutting him off, pushing him north, toward the deep gorges. Sheriff Blevins was close behind, his heavier horse churning through the snow and mud. He was a good man, but he was a town lawman. Kohana was a force of the land. The chase lasted for an hour. The flat land gave way to broken rock and red dust. They were in the canyons. Pike, seeing Kohana gaining, his horse tiring, realized his mistake. He was not on an open plain. He was in a trap. He was in Kohana's world. He spurred his horse up a steep, narrow trail. Kohana followed, the cavalry mount slipping on the loose shale. They came around a sharp bend, and Pike reined in his horse, cursing. The trail ended, or it had, a narrow rope bridge, the kind used by goat herders and native hunters, had once spanned the chasm. Now it was just two cut ropes, hanging uselessly in the wind. The chasm was 1,000 feet deep. The only way forward was a thin, crumbling ledge, barely a foot wide, that skirted the cliff face for 50 yards. Pike was trapped. Behind him was Kohana. In front of him was a sheer drop. Kohana dismounted, his rifle in his hand. He walked slowly, his boots silent on the red rock. "It is over. Pike, there is no more running." Sheriff Blevins arrived, pulling his winded horse to a stop. He unholstered his pistol. "Felix Pike, throw down your weapon. You are surrounded." Pike's face was a mask of sweat and dust. His showman's smile was gone, replaced by the naked, cornered animal snarl. "Surrounded," he laughed, his voice cracking. "I am surrounded by one old man and a savage." He looked at Kohana. You did this. You cost me everything. My business, my men, my money." His eyes were mad. "It was not a business," Kohana said, his voice flat. "It was a sickness." Pike saw a movement behind the sheriff. It was Evelyn. She had found a horse, a slow quarter horse from the fort, and had followed them. She arrived just in time to see the standoff, her face pale, her knuckles white on the reins. Pike saw her, and he saw his chance. "You want me," Pike screamed. He spurred his thoroughbred, not at Kohana, but at Evelyn. The horse, terrified, lunged past the sheriff. Before Evelyn could react, Pike was on her. He grabbed her from her saddle, his arm a steel band around her waist, pulling her onto his own horse, in front of him. He wheeled the horse back to the cliff edge. He held Evelyn as a human shield. "Now we have a new arrangement," Pike screamed, his voice echoing in the canyon. "Both of you, drop your guns, or she goes over. I swear to God, I will take her with me." Sheriff Blevins froze. "Do as he says, son," he whispered to Kohana. He let his pistol fall to the ground. Kohana stared. He saw Evelyn. She was not screaming. She was not fighting. She was pressed against Pike's chest, his arm crushing her. But her eyes were locked on Kohana. They were wide with terror, but they were not broken. He lowered his rifle. He did not drop it. He held it, balanced in his hand. "Drop it, savage!" Pike shrieked, his arm tightening. Evelyn gasped for air. Kohana looked at her. He saw her eyes. She was giving him a message. It was not a plea. It was a command. Trust me. He knew that look. It was the look of the woman who had faced the cowboy, the woman who had asked for his hand in the dark. Kohana gave a single, almost invisible nod. And then he did something Pike could not understand. He did not drop the rifle. He looked at Pike's horse. And he whistled. It was not a human sound. It was a high, thin, piercing shriek. It was the call of the red-tailed hawk. It was a sound of the deep plains, a hunting call. Pike's thoroughbred, a high-strung animal from the east, heard the sound. It was not a noise it knew. It was a sound that meant death from the sky. The horse screamed, a sound of pure terror, and reared, its front hooves lashing out over the empty air of the canyon. The heavy saddlebags, the ones filled with Pike's gold and his ledgers, unbalanced by the violent motion, ripped free from the saddle horn. They tumbled, end over end, into the chasm. They vanished, swallowed by the red shadows. Pike roared, a sound of pure animal loss. His arm, the one holding Evelyn, loosened for a fraction of a second as he grabbed for the reins. It was all she needed. Evelyn did not fight him. She did not struggle. She simply went limp. She let her entire body weight drop, sliding down, under his arm. It was a brilliant, simple, unexpected move. Pike's grip, expecting resistance, found nothing. She slipped free from his grasp. She did not fall over the cliff. She fell to the narrow, rocky ledge at the horse's feet. Pike, his shield gone, his money gone, his madness complete, tried to untangle his rifle from his saddle. You! He screamed. Kohana lunged. He did not use his own rifle. He did not go for a killing blow. He moved under the rearing. Terrified horse, he sprang up, his gray flint knife in his hand. The knife that was his mother's, the knife he had used to mark Bowie Sam. He did not cut Pike. He cut the leather rifle strap. The strap snapped. Pike, his balance gone, his rage making him clumsy, toppled backward. He fell from the saddle. He hit the ledge, the rock crumbling under his weight. He did not stop. He rolled, screaming, over the edge of the chasm. He did not fall. His hand, in a last desperate reflex, caught a root, a single, gnarled piece of juniper, protruding from the cliff face. He dangled 100 feet above the canyon floor. He was screaming, his face purple, his one hand white as he clung to the root. "Help me, please, oh God! Help me! Do not let me fall! Help me!" Sheriff Blevins ran to the edge. He was too far. Evelyn was frozen, huddled on the ledge. Kohana was the only one close enough. He stood on the solid trail, looking down at the man who had destroyed so many lives, the man who had taken Matthew, the man who had taken Sarah, the man who had branded Willa. He could just stand there. He could just watch. He could be the stone. He could let the man's own weight, the man's own evil, pull him into the void. It would be justice. He looked at Pike. Then he looked at Evelyn, who was watching him, her face full of terror and trust. He sheathed his knife. He got on his belly, his body flat against the crumbling red rock. He slid forward until his chest was over the edge. He reached down. He grabbed the front of Felix Pike's coat. "No!" Pike shrieked, thinking Kohana was going to push him. Kohana's grip was iron. He did not pull, he just held. "Justice is a voice," Kohana said, his voice a low growl, the words torn from his own soul. Not a fall. He began to pull. He was strong, but Pike was a heavy man. Dead weight, slick with sweat and fear. Kohana's arms strained, the muscles in his back burning. He was sliding, the gravel cutting into his chest. "Son, hold on!" Sheriff Blevins yelled. He scrambled down, grabbing Kohana's ankles, anchoring him to the ledge. Pull, damn you!" Together, they hauled, with a final, agonizing heave. They dragged Felix Pike up over the edge. He flopped onto the rock, a gasping, weeping, broken thing. He was covered in his own filth. Sheriff Blevins did not hesitate. He rolled Pike onto his stomach, yanked his arms behind him, and clamped the iron handcuffs on his wrists. The click was the loudest sound in the canyon. Pike lay there, sobbing, in the red dust. He finally lifted his head, his face a mask of spittle and hate. You think this is over. This is nothing. I have friends. I have money. My money. My money. He looked at the chasm, and a new, terrible wail of loss tore from him. It is gone. Your money is gone, Pike, the sheriff said, hauling him to his feet. And your friends are in Santa Fe, but the federal wire is faster, and the witnesses are here. Your company is finished. Kohana looked Kohana. Blevins said, his voice rough with respect, Get the lady. Kohana went to Evelyn. She was still on the narrow ledge, her back pressed to the cliff wall. She was shaking. Her eyes were closed. She was breathing, in and out, in and out. The 4-4 count. Her hands were not reaching for him. They were pressed flat against her own chest, as if holding herself together. She was self-soothing. She was finding her own anchor. He stood in front of her. He did not reach. He did not grab. He waited. She opened her eyes. She saw him. He held his hand out, palm up, a question. She looked at his hand. Then she looked at his face, and she nodded. He took her hand. He did not pull her. He simply held on, a solid presence, as she found her own footing and stepped back onto the solid trail. She let go of his hand and stumbled away, her body shaking with the delayed shock. She was safe. Matthew was safe. It was over. Kohana stood, watching her. He was watching her fight for her own breath, her own space. He saw her pain, her terror, and her unbreakable strength. He had built a life of silence, a wall to keep the world out. He had thought that was strength. He had been wrong. That was a fortress. She was strength. Strength was not a wall. It was a hand reaching out in the dark. It was a voice, asking for permission. His silence, he realized, had been a lie. It was not an absence of noise. It was an absence of connection. He did not want that silence anymore. He wanted her silence. He wanted the safe, shared quiet they had found in the cabin. The quiet that was not empty, but full. The quiet that was built on 2 words, spoken and agreed. He stepped toward her. She looked up, her face pale, her eyes haunted. He stopped, a foot away. He kept his hands at his sides. May I? He asked, his voice rough. She did not ask what he meant. She knew. She saw the question in his eyes. He was not asking to take. He was not asking to claim. He was asking to offer. He was asking to be the wall. She gave a small, shuddering nod. He stepped forward. He put his arms around her. He did not pull her. He did not crush her. He simply held her. He put one hand on her back, the other on her head, and he stood, solid as the mountain, as she shook against him. She was not holding on to him. He was holding her. He was the wall, and the storm inside her was finally breaking. The wire, she whispered, her voice muffled against his shirt. I sent the wire. I know, he said, his own voice thick. It is over. Yes, he said. From the telegraph office in the fort, the signal was already racing down the humming iron line. A federal marshal in Santa Fe was reading a report. He was signing an order. The network that Felix Pike had built, the one that stretched from Kansas to California, was already beginning to crumble. Justice, which had begun with a whispered word in a dusty office, was now a voice as loud as thunder. The journey back to Fort Elliott was a quiet one. The fury of the chase had dissolved, leaving behind a cold, weary reality. Felix Pike rode the mule, his hands bound, his face a mask of sullen silence. Sheriff Blevins flanked him. Kohana and Evelyn rode side by side, their horses moving at a slow walk. The embrace in the canyon had changed the air between them. It was no longer a space of tension and unspoken rules. It was a shared, quiet territory. The fort was a different place. Captain Miller was in the brig, his buttons stripped, awaiting his own court-martial. The man's greed had been his undoing. The colonel in charge of the fort, an older, sterner man, had no patience for officers who soiled the uniform. The circus car was open. Sister Maria and the fort's doctor were tending to the half-dozen women who had been locked inside. Sarah Malone was among them, pale and traumatized, but alive. Sheriff Blevins wasted no time. He was a territorial lawman, and he used the full weight of the fort's authority to convene an immediate hearing in the mess hall. It was not a trial, but an extradition hearing, held to gather the evidence for the federal marshals. The hall was packed. Soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder with laundresses. Miners, who had come to see justice, stood near the back. Pike was brought in, his chains rattling. He looked small and pathetic without his showman's voice. The evidence was laid out on a table, Pike's own ledger, with its neat, damning lines of accounting, Sister Maria's glass photographic plate, a ghostly image of faces in a cage, and the witnesses. Willa was the first to speak. She stood tall, her voice clear and cold, cutting through the silence. She did not speak of her fear. She spoke of the brand, the crate, and the dates. She was a weapon of pure fact. Sarah Malone, holding her mother's hand, spoke next. Her voice was a bare whisper, but everyone leaned in to hear. She pointed at Pike. "He told me he would make me a star." Matthew Hart, his lungs still raw but his eyes clear, spoke last. He detailed the routes. He described the black car. He explained how Pike used the railroad's own schedule to move his human cargo, invisible in plain sight. The telegraph operator, the last witness, presented the answering wire from the Santa Fe Marshal's office. A federal warrant was issued. The United States government was now officially hunting the entire Felix Pike network. Pike's local reign of terror was over. He would be transported, under military guard, to Santa Fe to stand trial for capital crimes. They left the fort 2 days later. It was a slow, strange procession back to Esperanza. Matthew, weak but healing, rode the mule. Joe Running Fox and Willa rode beside them. Kohana and Evelyn followed, their silence comfortable, their rhythm matched. When Esperanza came into view, the wind itself seemed to have changed. The news had traveled faster than they had. The telegraph wire had sung its song. The Red Calf Saloon was quiet. The town's corrupt sheriff, the man with the gold watch, had vanished, riding out in the night. Widow Malone was standing on the porch of her store. She had been standing there, watching the road. For 2 days. She saw the small group. She saw Sarah. The widow did not run. She did not cry out. She walked, her steps stiff, down the porch and onto the street. Sarah slid from the mule, and the two women met. It was a silent collision. A desperate, breathless embrace that spoke of months of unspeakable terror and a lifetime of relief. Widow Malone looked over her daughter's shoulder at Evelyn, her eyes streaming. She could not speak. She just nodded. A deep, profound acknowledgement, a debt that could never be repaid, only honored. A week passed. The town began to heal. The wind still blew, but the fear was gone. The front window of Malone's general store, which had always displayed bolts of cloth and sacks of flour, was cleared. Widow Malone, with Gus Ortega's help, built a set of clean pine shelves. She took her daughter's own McGuffey's reader, the one she had kept in the daguerreotype frame, and set it on the shelf. Then she walked to Evelyn. "May I?" she asked. Evelyn, understanding, handed her own book, the one that had crossed the country, the one she had used to challenge a room full of killers. The widow placed it next to her daughter's. "This is a reading room now," she announced to the street. "This store will sell salt and bullets, but this window, this is for books, so no child and no woman in this town is ever again ignorant of the words on a contract." Evelyn's school started the next day. It was not in a building. It was on the wide, sunny porch of the general store. Her students were a mix of the New West, Gus Ortega's two sons, their faces bright and curious. 3 shy, watchful children from a nearby Comanche camp, who had heard of the white woman who spoke with Kohana. 2 pale, thin children belonging to a miner, their eyes wide with a hunger for something other than just food. Willa stayed. She sat on the top step of the porch, a silent guardian. She had no interest in teaching, but she had a profound interest in protecting. She sharpened her small knife and watched the street, ensuring the space was safe. She listened to Evelyn, her lips moving, slowly learning the English letters for herself. Matthew's health returned, but slowly. The coal dust had settled deep in his lungs, leaving him with a cough that would never leave. But his mind was clear, his spirit unbroken. He could not shovel coal, and he could not ride the range. He found his place in the telegraph office. The young operator, who saw Matthew as a hero, gladly taught him the code. His fingers, which had grown strong from shoveling, learned the delicate, rhythmic tapping. He had lost his voice to the dust, but now his hands would be the voice of the entire town, connecting them to the world, sending and receiving words of commerce, of law, and of hope. Joe Running Fox also found his purpose. Sheriff Blevins, before he returned to Fort Elliott, had offered him a post. "I need a ranger." Blevins had said, "Not a town deputy, but a man who can read the land, someone to watch the high plains, to ensure another pike does not grow in the shadows." Joe accepted. He would patrol the territory. His Kiowa skills now used not for war, but for peace. Kohana had disappeared the morning after they returned. He had spoken no word of leaving. He was just gone. Evelyn felt his absence like a missing part of her own body. She understood. He had gone back to his cabin, back to his silence. She had her world, he had his. The thought left a cold, empty space inside her. He rode for a full day, the Mustang moving fast, sensing home. He reached his canyon. The cottonwoods whispered. The spring bubbled. The air was clean. He walked into his cabin. It was exactly as he had left it, orderly, clean, silent. And he hated it. The silence was no longer a comfort. It was a void. It was not peace. It was emptiness. He saw the corner where she had huddled in the storm. He saw the spot on the floor where she had held his hand. This house was no longer a fortress. It was just an empty box. He looked at the gray flint knife on his belt. His mother's knife. It was his past. It was his boundary. It was the tool he had used to protect, to mark, to separate. He stood on his 3-legged stool. He reached up to the highest, darkest roof beam. He took the knife, and with a single, powerful motion, he drove the blade deep into the wood. The knife quivered, and then was still. It was not a weapon on his belt. It was a guardian, watching over the hearth. He was done with that part of his life. He was done with being a stone. He slept one night in the empty cabin. He woke before the sun, packed his saddlebags with fresh jerky, and rode back to Esperanza. He arrived in the late afternoon. He did not go to the store. He did not go to the livery. He sat on his Mustang across the street, in the shadow of the blacksmith's shop, and he watched. He saw her. She was on the porch, a piece of charcoal in her hand, guiding a small Comanche girl's fingers as they formed the letter B. She was smudged with dust. Her hair was coming loose from its bun, and she was smiling. He watched until the lessons were done. The children ran off, shouting. Willa gave Evelyn a short, sharp nod and went inside the store to help the widow. Evelyn was alone. She stood, stretching her back, her face turned to the afternoon sun. He rode the Mustang across the street. The sound of the hooves on the hard-packed dirt made her turn. She saw him. Her hand went to her throat. "You came back." "I came back," he said. He swung down from the horse. He did not tie the reins. The horse would not leave him. He stood at the bottom of the porch steps, looking up at her. A soft, misty rain began to fall. It was not a violent storm. It was a gentle, cleansing shower that settled the dust and made the air smell of earth. "I went home," he said, his voice low. The silence was too loud. She just watched him, her heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. He took one step up, then another, until he was standing on the porch, in front of her. He was close enough to see the flecks of gold in her hazel eyes. He was close enough to smell the chalk dust on her skin. He did not reach for her. He kept his hands at his sides. He remembered his rule, the one that had saved them both, spoken and agreed. "Evelyn," he said. It was the first time he had spoken her name in peace. "In the storm, I said I was the wall." "I remember," she whispered. "A wall is a cold thing. It is lonely." He met her gaze. "I do not want to be the wall. I want to be the house." She did not know what to say. She just waited. "I am asking you," he said, the words formal, almost stiff, but costing him everything. "I am asking your permission. May I kiss you?" The question was a physical thing. It hung in the misty air between them. He was not demanding. He was asking. He was giving her all the power. She looked at his face, the face of the man who had pulled her from the storm, the man who had held her hand in the dark, the man who had hauled his worst enemy back from the cliff edge. She did not trust the world. She did not trust the West, but she trusted him. She gave a small, slow, deliberate nod. He moved. He did not grab her. He did not pull her. He simply lifted his hand and placed it gently against the side of her face. His skin was rough, calloused, and warm. He leaned in and pressed his lips to hers. It was not a kiss of fire. It was not the kiss of a dime novel. It was short. It was warm. It tasted of salt and the open air. It was a promise. It was an agreement. It was the safest she had ever felt. He pulled back, his eyes still on hers. "Spoken," he whispered. "And agreed," she whispered back. They stood there for a long time, the mist falling around them. They began to talk, not of the past, but of the future. "I will not," she said, her voice firm, "ask you to change. I will not ask you to cut your hair, or take a white man's name, or read my Bible. And I," he said, "will not ask you to give up your books. I will not ask you to be silent. The cabin, it has a wide porch. It faces the south. It is a good place for a school." Sheriff Blevins found them there. He had been in his office, and he walked over, clearing his throat. "Ma'am, Kohana." "Sheriff," Kohana said, "I am riding for Santa Fe in the morning, to testify." Blevins said, "I am leaving a good deputy, but this territory needs more. It needs guardians. Joe Running Fox has agreed to be a territorial ranger. He said he would only do it if you would, too." Kohana looked at the high plains, visible at the end of the street. He looked at Evelyn. He was being offered a new place. Not a scout for war, not a man in hiding, a protector. "I have one condition," Kohana said. "Name it," the sheriff replied. "I hunt game. I track storms. I will not hunt men." Blevins nodded. "I am not asking for a bounty hunter. I am asking for a guardian." Agreed. That night, Evelyn sat at a small desk in the new reading room, a single oil lamp burning. She took out a fresh sheet of paper and a pen. She wrote to the Ladies' Philanthropic Society of Philadelphia. She told them everything. She told them of the darkness she had found. She told them of Pike's capture, of the federal warrant, and of the network's end. "And so," she wrote, her pen scratching in the quiet, "the evil has been met, but to keep the darkness at bay, we must have light. I have established a school. My students are Comanche, Mexican, and Anglo. They are hungry for knowledge. I am not asking for money for a building. I am asking for books. Send me your old readers, your histories, your poetry. Send me the tools to build a library on this border, so that the voices here are never, ever lost in the silence again." She signed her name, folded the letter, and sealed it. It would go out on the morning stage. The spring that followed the hard winter was a revelation. The land, scoured by snow and ice, exploded in a riot of blue bonnets and Indian paintbrush. The air was soft, the sky a high, clear blue. The sounds of the world returned, not as a threat, but as a promise. The sound of the creek, the whisper of new cottonwood leaves. They were not married by a preacher in a church. They were bound on the high plains, under the open sky. It was not a large gathering. Matthew was there, his cough quieter now, his face having regained some color. Willa was there, her hand resting on a new, finely bound ledger for the store, a gift from Widow Malone. Joe Running Fox came, riding in from his patrol, his Kiowa lance decorated with a single white dove feather. Widow Malone and her daughter Sarah, who was beginning to smile again, stood together, holding hands. An old Comanche elder, a man Kohana respected, came from the mountains. He was a man whose face was a map of the old world. He did not speak English. Kohana translated for Evelyn, his voice low. The elder did not speak of God or sin. He spoke of the land. He spoke of the wind and the stone. He said that a man who is only stone is dead. He must learn to be the earth, which accepts the seed. He said a woman who is only a voice is lost. She must learn to be the water, which gives life. He lit a small, clean fire of sweetgrass. The smoke rose, a thin, pure column into the vast blue. He blessed them, not with holy water, but with the smoke, waving it over them with a hawk feather. He blessed their hands, that they might build together. He blessed their eyes, that they might see the truth in each other. He blessed their mouths, that they might always speak with respect. There were no rings of gold. Kohana had spent the winter nights by the fire in the cabin, not alone, but with her. He had taken the reins of his old war pony, the one he had ridden as a scout. He had cut the leather into thin, delicate strips. He had braided them, a complex, strong, beautiful pattern. He had woven in a single, small turquoise bead, the color of the sky. He had made a simple, braided leather loop. He held it out to her. "It is not a chain," he said, his voice quiet. "It is a circle. It does not bind. It holds." Evelyn accepted it, sliding it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. She, in turn, had a gift for him. She had written to Philadelphia, and the package had arrived only yesterday. It was not a gun. It was not a knife. It was a pen, a fine, balanced, black fountain pen, its nib made of shining steel. "Your mother's knife is a memory," she said, her voice soft. This is for the future, for the words we will write, for the new laws, for the voices." He took the pen. It felt foreign in his hand, heavy and strange, but he held it, and he nodded. He would learn. The cabin by the spring was no longer a fortress of solitude. It was loud. It was loud with the sounds of children. Evelyn's school had moved from the store porch, which was too small, to Kohana's canyon. It was the perfect place, sheltered from the wind, safe from the town, cooled by the spring. He had built a long, smooth plank porch, the one she had whispered of, on Saturdays. The canyon filled with the sounds of children's voices, reading aloud. Comanche children sat next to miners' children, their faces scrubbed clean, all of them stumbling over the words in the McGuffey readers. Silence had a new meaning. It was no longer Kohana's shield against the world. It was the quiet space at the end of the day. It was the moment, after the children had gone home, when he and Evelyn would sit on the porch. It was the peace that settled over them, a quiet built not on absence, but on complete, unwavering trust. It was a silence where their memories, the storms and the trauma, could finally settle, like dust, and be at rest. The town of Esperanza was changing. The Red Calf Saloon still served whiskey, but the men who drank there were quieter. The town's fear had broken. One afternoon, Widow Malone rode out to the canyon. She came on a small wagon, her daughter Sarah beside her. She did not bring flour or salt. She brought a gift. She walked up to Evelyn, who was cleaning the charcoal slate. The widow held out a large, folded bundle. It was a cradle cloth, made of the finest, softest white wool from her store. It was edged in delicate lace, stitched by hand. "My grandmother made this," the widow said, her voice thick. I kept it for Sarah." She looked at her daughter, her eyes full of love and a deep, abiding sorrow for what had been lost. Sarah smiled, a watery, healing smile, and put her hand on her mother's arm. "It is not for the past," the widow said, pressing the cloth into Evelyn's hands. "It is for the future. This land, it needs new life. It needs a new start." It was a truce. It was a healing. It was the reconciliation of the women of the frontier, a bond forged in shared loss and a common, fierce hope. The news of the long-term justice came, as all news did now, over the wire. Matthew, his fingers flying, took the message down himself. He ran from the telegraph office, the yellow paper clutched in his hand. Felix Pike had been convicted in federal court. His friends in high places had abandoned him once his money was gone, and the full, horrifying scope of his operation was revealed in newspapers from Santa Fe to Washington. His network was shattered. He would spend the rest of his life in a federal penitentiary. The telegraph sang again. A week later, Captain Miller had been dishonorably discharged, cashiered from the Army in disgrace. Sheriff Blevins's testimony, combined with the evidence from Pike's own ledgers, had been absolute. The system, so slow and corrupt, had finally, under the weight of truth, been forced to work. Evelyn's letter to Philadelphia had borne fruit. Boxes began to arrive on the stagecoach. They were filled with books, histories, poetry, Shakespeare, books on mathematics, books on astronomy. They were old and worn, their covers broken, but they were a treasure. Kohana built a tall, sturdy bookcase for the porch. Gus Ortega, the blacksmith, built 2 more. They called it the Nomad Bookcase, a library for a town that was just learning to read. The children read, not just on the porch, but under the shade of the big cottonwood trees by the spring. Their laughter, high and clear, was a new sound in the canyon. It was a sound that Kohana had never known he was missing. It was a sound stronger than the wind. It was, he thought, the only sound loud enough to finally drown out the distant, lonely cry of the train whistle. One night, in the late spring, they sat on the porch. The day's lessons were done. The canyon was theirs. The fireflies were rising from the creek. The air was soft, full of the smell of juniper and clean water. Evelyn leaned her head against his shoulder. He did not stiffen. He did not pull away. He leaned his own head against hers. It was a simple, comfortable weight. "We need another porch," she whispered. He smiled, the expression still new on his face. "Another porch?" "Yes," she said. This one is for the books. It is for the school." She traced the line of his hand with her finger. "We need another one, on the other side. A porch for the saddles, and the rifles, and for you." He was silent for a long time, listening to the creek. "A house with 2 porches," he said. "One for the words, one for the world." He put his arm around her. A simple, solid embrace. "It is a good plan." They sat in their shared, comfortable silence. They had found their balance. "If the wind rises," he said, his voice a low rumble, speaking the vow that mattered. "We are still here." She covered his hand with her own. Side by side, with an asking and a nod. High above them, in the dark, a hawk cried out, hunting in the moonlight. Inside the cabin, on the high beam, the gray flint knife. His mother's memory. Rested. It was not a weapon. It was not a wall. It was a foundation. It was an old, sharp, beautiful thing, finally set in its right and proper place, watching over the home. The West promised nothing but to those who knew how to ask and how to nod. It offered a future. Thank you for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment and share your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales. Like this video, and give it a boost by hitting that hype button. It helps more than you know, and ensures these stories can be heard by many more.